will you please stand to say the Pledge of Allegiance with us? I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Will you please call the roll?
Councilmember, Agency Member Falcone. Here. Francisco.
Here.
Horton. House.
Here.
Schneider.
Here.
Williams. Mayor Chair Bloom. Item number 1, proclamation declaring the week of April 19th through the 26th, 2009 as Days of Remembrance in memory of the victims of the Holocaust.
And Ruth Harder's here to accept this, and I'm going to read the proclamation, then you can say some words if you'd like to. The Holocaust was a state-sponsored systematic persecution and annihilation of European Jewry by Nazi Germany and its collaborators between 1933 and 1945. Jews were the primary victims. 6 million were murdered, but Gypsies, the handicapped, Poles were also targeted for destruction and decimation for racial, ethnic, and national reasons. Millions more, including homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, Soviet prisoners of war, and political dissidents, also suffered grievous oppression and death under Nazi tyranny. The history of the Holocaust offers an opportunity to reflect on the moral responsibilities of individuals, societies, and governments. We, the people of the city of Santa Barbara, should always remember the terrible events of the Holocaust and remain vigilant against hatred, persecution, and tyranny. We, the people of the city of Santa Barbara, should actively rededicate ourselves to the principles of individual freedom in a just society. The days of remembrance have been set aside for the people of the city of Santa Barbara to remember the victims of the Holocaust, as well as to reflect on the need for respect of all peoples. As mayor of the city of Santa Barbara, I do hereby proclaim the week of Sunday, April 19th through Sunday, April 26th, as days of remembrance in memory of the victims of the Holocaust and in honor of the survivors, rescuers, and liberators. Thank you so much, Ruth, for coming. Here you go. Let me give you this microphone.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, and also to all the council. Fortunately, ADL and Santa Barbara is constantly monitoring, exposing, and developing ways to counter those who advocate and use violence for racist purposes, down to even bullying in our schools. That is why Santa Barbara has been designated as a city of respect. We accept this honor with pleasure and with pride. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ruth, for coming. Very good. Changes to the agenda?
There are no changes, Madam Mayor.
Okay, we have some public comment. I ordinarily have a clock here that keeps track, and I usually give people 2 minutes. I don't want you to all be so happy that the clock's gone, because I have a handy-dandy little timer here. But we will definitely give you 2 minutes. We're going to get a new clock, I heard, so that's good. I hope we can afford it, huh? We'll find out later. Jeff Alexander will be followed by Gert Walter. Jeff?
Good afternoon, Mayor Blum and members of the council. I just wanted to very briefly recap a bit on the film production that was here in town for a few days last week. As you know, we had Universal Pictures here with a rather large production over 3 days. And this is, I just wanted to note this is a great business for us. They came, they spent a little bit of time, and they spent a great deal more money, and they left everything cleaner than they found it. And this is good business for Santa Barbara. They spent, about $600,000 over 3 days here, with thousands of dollars going directly to the city, actually, through bed tax and fees and that sort of thing. And I think they really also sort of brought the community together. It seemed that people were very positive about their presence here. And particularly, I really wanted to say thank you and to note what a phenomenal job people here at the city did in helping to bring the production in, helping to deal with all their logistical needs, and really being light on their feet and very quick and responsive when issues came up. Parks and Rec, Nancy Rapp, Susan Jane Bardick, Public Works, of course the Santa Barbara Police Department, council members, everybody was absolutely phenomenal. And I have to tell you the response that we got from this company was that this was outstanding and as good as it gets. And they're spreading that good word in that community, which I believe will help to bring more of this type of business here. And so we have a very satisfied customer, and I want to thank you all for your efforts. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming and talking to us about it. We also love seeing it, so it was entertainment for a lot of us, to see actually how they do those movies. It's amazing. It's a lot of work, but thank you for coming. Gert Walter will be followed by George Green.
Madam Mayor and members of the City Council, I really come before you today to pray for you. I know that you have very important items in the agenda, and you're going to be deciding some important issues in the budget, and I want to pray for that. So, eternal God and loving Father, we lift in prayer these members of the Santa Barbara City Council, and we ask you to give them wisdom. Wisdom to discern the best way to stretch our limited resources to cover the diverse needs of this community. We ask for wisdom for them to work with each other, with staff and with citizens, in a gracious and respectful manner. The wisdom to move effectively in resolving those issues which are most grievous to our most vulnerable citizens. And we ask this in the name of your Son, our Redeemer, Jesus. Thank you. That was brief, I hope.
Thank you. George Green will be followed by Mike Scherer.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, my name is George Green. I'm the organizing director, senior field staff for SEIU Local 620. I found out last week how quick 2 minutes goes, so I'm going to rock. I sent council and mayor a letter yesterday regarding our negotiations with the city over furloughs and trying to mitigate layoffs. So I won't be redundant and read from that letter. I'd ask you folks to read that. It's our goal. I understand you do not have a closed session to give direction to your bargaining team today, which I think is unfortunate. But we have a goal of getting back to the bargaining table, talking to you guys about furloughs. We've offered up concessions of over $1,200,000 to the city. And we have not characterized the offers we put on the table as last, best, and final offers. I think there's some more creative things we could do to help you guys out with this year's fiscal year budget. But in order for our membership to ratify an agreement on this kind of, salary concessions, we need to get quid pro quo bargaining from you guys with regard to layoffs. I mean, our goal is to not have folks laid off. If you look at what Mr. Pearson's going to be presenting today, and you look at the list of proposed layoffs, there's a whole lot more people on the layoff list that are rowing the boat than are steering the boat. Everybody that we represent in the general unit provides direct services to the citizens of Santa Barbara. Every single person. At the library, they're giving books. At the parks, they're taking care of the parks. To be politically correct about it, when you get into those management positions, those are people that are providing indirect services to the city of Santa Barbara, and we hope we have a shared interest in you maintaining service levels at the level they're at. So we hope we can reach an agreement with you folks sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Right on time. Mick Scherer will be followed by, just a second, Bob Evans.
My message was very similar to George Green, so for the sake of efficiency, I'm going to yield my speaking time.
Okay, thank you. Bob Evans will be followed by Brad Klein.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. I'm here as an employee of the City of Santa Barbara for quite some time, and I'm in the building maintenance, which I've worked with all of you, so you know. I provide direct services to the city, and I am on the negotiating team for the mitigation of layoffs and furloughs. And we know you're in a tough economic situation with revenues and expenditures. We need for you to direct your people to get back to the table, and let's work this deal out, because it's in all of our best interest to get it done as soon as possible to help with your budget process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Brad Klein will be followed by Lisa Arroyo.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council members. My name is Brad Klein, and I work for Public Works Downtown Parking Division. I am service worker. I deal with all of the parking equipment. I do customer service, such as jump starts, lockouts when people lock their keys in their car. Although I am part of an enterprise fund, we are all affected by the furloughs. And I know that negotiations have come to pretty much a standstill. And I know that we're all willing to make sacrifices and to make sure that we can provide the level of service to the city that we've been providing for the years past. I'd just like to get back to the negotiation table. That's all.
Thank you. Lisa Arroyo will be followed by Dave Harris.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Arroyo, and I'm a project engineer for Public Works. Like Bob, I'm also a member of the negotiation team. We've been making proposals since February that have offered the city about $1.2 million in concessions and salary savings through furloughs and other concessions. We do recognize that the city is experiencing some budget problems because of the economy, and we hope to be a partner with the city in finding ways to help balance a budget without cutting services to the citizens of Santa Barbara. If we are going to reach a negotiated agreement, we really need to tell our membership that with their labor concessions, they're getting something, that they are going to be getting a guarantee in staff reductions. So I'm asking the City Council to please help us get back to that negotiation table, and so that we can put some proposals together that will help provide general fund relief, as well as give our membership some guarantees with staff reduction. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Dave Harris will be followed by Kate Smith. I think she's the last speaker.
Well, Madam Mayor and Council, my name is Dave Harris. I work at the city's motor pool. I'm a member of the General Employees Unit and a member of SEIU Local 620. In an effort to help the city of Santa Barbara meet their budget and save jobs, the employees of the General Unit are willing to participate in the work furlough process. I am on the bargaining team for the furlough discussions. Back in February, we made a proposal that would save the city over $1 million in salary savings. This is a respectable proposal, and it's my understanding that of all the employee groups, this is the largest proposal thus far. If General Unit employees are laid off, you are cutting direct services to the citizens of Santa Barbara. We are requesting that you authorize your bargaining team to salvage the jobs marked for layoff and help us reach an agreement in the furlough discussions. The members of the General Unit stand with you on your decision to do this and look for your leadership to guide us to better times. Thank you.
Thank you. Kate Smith will be the last speaker.
I know you're watching that clock. Madam Mayor and Santa Barbara City Council, I am asking for a moment to correct your ceremonial agenda item, in which you proclaimed that this was the week of days of remembrance in memory of the victims of the Holocaust. May I have that moment to make a correction to your proclamation? Madam Mayor?
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Got the floor.
This is a correction. After a 7-year study, it has been determined that 2 million Jews were annihilated in the Holocaust of bullets. This is in addition to the 6 million Jews that you cited. Nazis forced villagers to dig miles of trenches. Jews were marched to the edge, shot, and then the villagers were forced to cover their bodies. The villagers gave their stories to the man that documented this Holocaust of bullets, and they were relieved of their burden and their guilt. You have asked our community to remember what hatred, persecution, and tyranny can do to humanity. I come before you now to state there is a Holocaust in our society. There is child abuse and institutionalized racism in our schools. And this morning I came before the Board of Supervisors to declare that I was speaking for those who could not speak for themselves. And I state now that I am speaking for children who have killed themselves or killed others.
Okay, your time. Thank you.
Is up?
Yep.
Time flies. I have the announcements of the no on 1D and 1E.
Good.
And the Board of Supervisors just took a position. I am asking you to take a position on this very important proposition.
Could you tell us if it's yes or no? Just want to know.
They're taking the position no on 1E and 1D.
Good. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Kate. Okay, we have no more speakers. Let me turn off the clock. So we are on to the consent calendar. We have a couple things that people want to take off. Go ahead and read what you need to, Cindy, and then we'll take them off one at a time.
Item number 5, adoption of ordinance for amendments to the 2007 Fire Code. Recommendation that council adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the council of the city of Santa Barbara amending subsection E of section 8.04.020 and subsection C and D of section 22.04.020 of the Santa Barbara Municipal Code concerning local requirements for the installation of automatic fire sprinklers. Item number 6, introduction of ordinance for a tournament agreement with H. Oliver Dixon Incorporated and Business First Bank, including recommendation B that council introduce and subsequently adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the council of the city of Santa Barbara approving an tournament agreement between the city of Santa Barbara as lessor, H. Oliver Dixon Incorporated as lessee, and Business First Bank, a division of Heritage Oaks Bank, as lender pertaining to lease agreement number 21810 dated November 1, 2005. Item number 7, easements at the airport, including recommendation C, the council adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the council of the city of Santa Barbara accepting the grant of access easements on real property known as Coromar Drive and Discovery Drive, assessors parcel number 073-450-005.
Okay, and let's start with item number 2. Go ahead and read the title of item 2. And I think it's Mr. Horton that wants to take that off.
Item number 2, City of Santa Barbara 2009 Legislative Platform.
Okay, Mr. Horton, and I've got a couple people from the public who would like to speak on this.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Our legislative platform is up for consideration today by the full council. On page 26, there's an item speaking to opposition of legislation that impacts First Five of California. I want to tell people what my personal opinion is on this. During the 1990s, a group of concerned citizens in California became worried about the state of affairs of the children in our community, the children and families. They felt that the children were not being given adequate health care, were not ready for school, not having adequate nutrition. And so in 1998, they passed Proposition 10 to attempt to generate funding from the tobacco tax. Proposition 10 provides 50 cents per pack of cigarettes sold to First Five of California. What First Five does is it provides health insurance for the youngest children in our state. It helps to provide quality child care and daycare for families that can't afford it otherwise. It provides dental care, examinations, and dental work for the families that otherwise could not afford dental care. And for me, one of the biggest things it does is it provides literacy programs so that when the children of our state are ready to enter school, they're able to enter at the appropriate grade level and be able to compete adequately with others in the state. And I don't see how we can expect to be a state that is concerned about all of our population, including the children, unless we do this very basic service. And what Proposition 1D does is it takes approximately half of the funding from Prop 10 and it reallocates it to the general fund of the state for use basically however Sacramento feels it should be spent, but not for children. It also serves to delay funding for the rest of Prop 10, what's left, until all of the funds for the year are in, which means that basically all of the programs that we have going in our communities will be put on hold until all the revenue is in. I don't see how we can function with a situation like this, and I am very strongly opposed to Proposition 1D, and I believe that everybody that's concerned and worried about the children of our state should be opposed to it as well. I think it's also a very bad practice to reverse a public position, which was Prop 10, when the public supported resoundingly Prop 10 in the first place, and then to take that vote and allocate the money back into general fund. No doubt the state has severe budget problems. I know that as well as anybody does, but this is not the way to solve it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So the idea is that you are supporting what we have in our legislative platform, which is to oppose any legislation that would take money from First Five. Okay, Pat Wheatley, we have Pat Wheatley, followed by Jeff Green. The microphone's still on, so hi, Pat. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and members of City Council. It's always a pleasure to come before you. I'm deeply appreciative, and I've always been appreciative of the support that Santa Barbara City has given to young children throughout our communities and definitely to the work of First Five. As Councilmember Horton and also Commissioner on First Five so eloquently stated, Proposition 1D would really have a huge, huge impact in the lives of children throughout our county and throughout our state. It is a very confusingly written proposition. It looks as if we're just temporarily, and temporarily translates to 5 years, we are temporarily moving money from targeted local control and highly researched and accountable system to support integrated and quality services for young children and the people who care for them, and move it to the general fund where the legislators may, should they choose, to fund statewide services for children in foster care or children in child welfare services. There is no requirement around that issue, nor accountability on that issue. It is an intention, but not a directive, nor an accountable directive. The other thing is that it will take, over the 5-year period of time, $1.6 billion from First Five throughout the state of California and move them into a general fund period of time. Santa Barbara and other counties throughout the state have been highly successful in leveraging these dollars through public and private partnerships, and we come close to doubling our funding because of those partnerships that we've been very successful. So let's take this down to Santa Barbara County, and what does that mean? Right now we get approximately $5 million a year from Prop 10 revenue. Overall, just within our internal budget is $7.6 million, showing an idea of what kind of money we are able to leverage internally. But in addition to that, we are also able to, with our other agencies, bring down over $2.5 million of leveraged dollars. So this money magnifies itself for local services meeting the needs of greatest need in our community. This type of redirection of funding over a 5-year period of time also would absolutely decimate the services that we've spent 10 years building, evaluating, and putting into place. And at the end of 5 years, if First Five still existed at that point, and I say if because I feel that once you open the door of a proposition, the likelihood of sustaining that proposition is probably minimal at best. But at the end of 5 years, if all were the same, we would have to start rebuilding at much less revenue. Also, we are a decreasing revenue source, and the way the legislation has been written, there is a stipulated amount of money that must be aggregated before there's any money allocated out to the counties. Because we're a decreasing revenue source, it starts at 50%, but at the end of 5 years, it'll be between 65 and 70% of a decrease in revenue. So there's many problems with this proposition. I urge you to vote no or take a position of an opposition to Proposition 1D. And I also would like to say, as was already announced, that about an hour ago, not quite, the Board of Supervisors took a unanimous position to oppose both D and E. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Wheatley. We have Jeff Green, followed by Kate Smith.
Good afternoon, Mayor Bloom and members of the council. I'm here on behalf of the Fund for Santa Barbara today to speak about both 1D and 1E. I was also in the hearing about an hour ago with Pat Wheatley to watch the Board of Supervisors have this similar debate, and her numbers are excellent, so I won't rehash those. I just want to make 3 points about why I'd like to ask you all to take a position clearly opposed to 1D and 1E. First of all, they were voter initiatives. So unlike the other 4 on the ballot, these were clear one-time votes of the state of California to allocate these funds for a specific purpose. They passed 11 and 5 years ago, respectively, with majority votes, not huge ones, but solid ones, and have become and were lost since that time. Both of these they only passed because they were targeted for our state's most vulnerable population. So we're talking about young children, homeless, mentally ill. And that is why people were willing to add these additional revenue streams. So from my perspective and the perspective of the organizations we work with, which is over 200 local grassroots groups a year, these shouldn't even be on the table to fill the budget hole. We acknowledge there's a huge budget mess. We're all quite aware of it, but this is not a good starting place for how to fill these holes that we have. Secondly, this is already going to be a very, very difficult election. It is short on its timeline. It was only called in late February. Budget arguments were done weeks after that. Most people in the state are not aware that there's an election happening on May 19th, 4 weeks from today. And so we're already up against a time crunch. We're up against some really, truly Orwellian language on 1D in particular, which its title is exactly the opposite of what it does, which is astounding to me that made it through, but it did. And then finally, it's confusing, and you may have seen Jerry Roberts' piece a couple of weeks ago. He called it, I believe, the Einstein ballot, which was basically to say if you can understand it, you're better than he is. Because these are incredibly confusing, they're incredibly intertwined, and I know very few people who can clearly explain all 6. So with all of that as context, I want to ask you to take a clear position because that clear position will actually help in the organizing effort against these. The good news is the recent polling shows they are not looking like they will pass. If we know what history says, confusing elections with short timelines, generally people will tend toward the no, not the yes, but we still need to get out there and make sure that it's understood what's at stake here. So I want to ask you to add your voice to those. And again, just acknowledge the supervisors just did the same, and I'm hoping that you will as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much,
Madam
Mr.
Mayor.
Green. Okay.
I have a legal question at this point.
Well,
Do you
okay,
want to
but let me
Kate-
just see if Kate Smith is still here. Oh, you are. Okay, let's take the last.
Okay, and then I have something from
okay.
Mr. Wiley.
Sure.
Could I have one of my flyers that announces the press conference on Thursday, April 23rd at 11:30 at the Santa Barbara County Courthouse, Sunken Gardens? You can help make a difference in the lives of many by coming and supporting the opposition to Proposition 1E and 1D, which, if passed, will cut mental health care programs by millions. Again, the voter initiative, Proposition 63, dedicated taxed monies to the mentally ill. And this proposition betrays the public trust. At the Board of Supervisors meeting today, I declared that this was America's second Civil War, and this is the title of a book by Dr. Lewis Andrews of yankeeinstitute.org. This is the public employment complex versus the taxpayer. I want you to know that Doreen Farr is commended for placing Roger Thompson, who is the founder and president of CAC, Consumer Advisory Coalition, on the Mental Health Commission. And on April 17th, he stated to the commission, "The jig is up. They are guilty of criminal activity, and the supervisors of this county are just as guilty if they remain silent and do not investigate and make the people accountable for their criminal actions." You're in the same boat. We've been here before, and we'll be here again. This is a democracy, a government that is of the people, as you are. It is by the people. We see you. But it has to be for the people. And at this point, our government has run amok. It has self-aggrandized. And the plan of the money that is to come to us for stimulus is going to nothing but a big bureaucracy. So please do take a look at the Board of Supervisors meeting. I'd like to read to you what President James Garfield said at a nomination for the presidency. "The people are responsible for the character of their Congress. If that body be ignorant, reckless, and corrupt, it is because the people tolerate ignorance, recklessness, and corruption. If it be intelligent, brave, and pure, it is because the people demand these high qualities. If the next centennial does not find us a great nation, it will be because those who represent the enterprise of our government made it so." I would like you to look at SB School Talk to read the hundreds of entries of books, policy papers, articles, and videos that declare what I have just stated. We are in an uprising, but this will be a glorious revolution. We will have truth, justice, and the American way.
Thank you.
Again.
Okay, I don't have any other speaker slips, but I would just so we're really clear, this is on our agenda as a legislative platform for 2009 because we have several items that are on our platform. We have to look at it on a yearly basis, but one of the items is to oppose legislation or administrative efforts to decrease the state budgets for First Five, and so that's how this came up, which is item 1D on your ballot in May, in 3 weeks. Isn't it? Wow, that's amazing. In 3 weeks. So item 1D is to take money from First Five, and item 1E is to take money from Prop 63, I believe, which is for mental health. So that's why we're talking about this. Okay. Ms. Falcone, you had
Thank
a
you,
question.
Madam Mayor.
Sure.
Exactly on that point, it's either a point of order or a process question. I'm not quite sure which. But the item that is agendized for discussion is the adoption of the legislative platform, and then to authorize the mayor and others in her absence to contact state and federal representatives to send letters to advocate for positions consistent with the goals of the platform. Now, my specific question here is, regardless of my own personal feelings about either one of these or any of the propositions that are on, the adoption of the platform as a whole, as has been presented, is clearly something that we can discuss. Authorizing the mayor to send letters consistent with the adopted platform is certainly something that we could do today. Arguably, the 1D conversation falls within that because it's specifically called out in the platform. However, discussion or position taking on a specific proposition that is not specifically called out and has not been agendized, i.e. 1E or any of the others, I'm not quite sure is appropriate for today, although I'd be happy to put that on as an agenda item for a future discussion, as I think that maybe folks would like to have that conversation. But Mr. Wiley, do you understand the parsing that I'm trying to just clarify here? It's just so we don't run over our own toes in an effort to, in good intentions.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Falcone, I think I do understand, and I agree with your summary of where we are on
Okay.
this.
So we're good to go with the adoption and the authorization for 1D communications. However, 1E is not within our purview of discussion at this moment in time, as it's not agendized. Is that about right?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Falcone, unless there is something, and I have to say I'm not the most familiar with this entire platform.
I'm pretty
unless
familiar
there's
with
something
it.
in here that clearly implicates or would reference 1E like 1D is, then I think it should probably be agendized separately.
Well, I'm pretty familiar with the legislative platform, as I've been the chair for 6+ years of that committee. I'd be happy to make a motion unless there's other discussion that you would like to
But let me ask you,
take.
because you're on the League of Cities, League of California Cities State Board, and I know that they voted, and I think you did too with them, for 1D.
We voted for the package. We didn't take them out. We didn't call them out separately. We as individual elected officials are free then to do whatever it is in our own hearts and in our own minds in our jurisdictions, and that is not prohibited. But as a package for the state board to support the governor, the vote was taken 27-9 to support the package, which means all of them, not discussed as individual measures.
I understand, but I think it's too bad that the League of Cities did that. So
Well, then-
can you tell us what the conversation was about that?
The conversation
voted
had to
for
do
it.
with, sure, I'd be happy to, and the minutes are certainly available. I'll get you a copy. The conversation had to do with the need to balance the state budget with state funds. The League of California Cities is an organization of 484 cities throughout the state of California whose primary purview is to safeguard, protect, and really watch out for legislation and moves at the state capitol or at the federal level that will impact local revenues. That is their main function. That is their main focus. Local revenues have to do with general funds, paying public safety, paying the salaries of the folks who you heard from earlier. It has to do with keeping our revenue sources local and within our control. So the discussion was absolutely focused like a laser beam on retaining local control for all of our city revenues, which have to do with keeping TOT and sales tax, property tax, utility tax, all coming to us and within our local control. Now, what we have asked them not to do is not to steal from our local coffers. What we've asked them to do is leave our revenues out of the mix of how the state legislature, balances their out-of-control budget. We asked them as a group, as a unit, as 485 cities and representatives thereof, to balance their budget on their own backs, not ours, on the state monies. Now, Prop 10 and Prop 63 and others, the state lottery is part of this. And also creating a rainy day fund by increasing a sales tax, I believe it is. And also not to give themselves raises if they can't come to a balanced budget. I don't think they should get paid, period, if they can't come to a balanced budget. But that didn't fly for obvious reasons. But the 1D and the 1E are actually state funds. And so they are moving around. Granted, it's a shell game, and they're moving monies around, but they're doing it with their own monies. They're not asking us to write them a check. That's the function of the League of California Cities. That's their main mandate. And as an organization, to send that message to the legislature was overwhelmingly what people thought was the right thing to do. Now, can I do whatever I want in my own jurisdiction, and the leadership of the League knows that? Absolutely, and I know a number of other folks who did vote for the package for those specific reasons to go ahead and make a different statement in their own jurisdiction. And so there are many who are in the same boat, and I thank you for bringing it to my attention.
Well, I think it's like writing a check, though, because we have First Five here locally. We have good programs, and I think it's a shame to cut them out. I just don't think it. And the first 5 years of a child's life is where we have found that you get the best bang for the buck, and you know that too. So,
and I agree with that. And we're free to take positions. We're free to take positions in our own jurisdictions to try to defeat it, which is what I think we're just about to do.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Schneider.
Thank you. I just want to thank those who came here about this today to educate the public about something that's on May 19th, and to thank Mr. Horton for bringing it up from the consent calendar. For those who want to know publicly, I've come out against both Prop D and Prop 1E, 1D and 1E, and I would hope that, assuming the legislative platform goes through today, since the 1D language is in here, that when we do send letters out, we also send a letter to the League of Cities explaining our position here, because I think it's important that they know, considering that the League of Cities took an alternate view. If we want to talk about 1E as a group, I can leave that to the council. I'm personally against it, and look forward to the rally coming up. I do think, though, just in terms of philosophy, that the voters a few years ago passed another 1A a number of years ago about city revenues, and said that if the state was going to take city revenues, it can only do that as a loan, and only for a certain number of years and with interest. And I know Councilmember Falcone was very much involved in helping that passage, and which was very grateful, and we know we were all in part of that. So you know, that we have some protections there, which is really helpful. The redevelopment agency and our funding there is not so secure, although there's some legal issues around that. The Prop 1D and Prop 1, well, I'll mention just Prop 1D, even though 1E has similar situations, since I want to stay within the agenda. I think was designated for a particular item, for a particular program when the voters voted it in, and frankly, to take money away from that particular program when the economy is down, when more children need those funds now more than ever. And if Ms. Wheatley is correct that it's going to be a 5-year program, a kid born today is never going to see any of the funding, because they'll be 5 by the time the funding may come back. So there's a lot of problems around that, and I don't think the amount of money that's going into the state general fund is really going to solve the major problem, whereas some of the other propositions might help a little more so. So I am very comfortable in supporting the legislative platform with the new language, and just would encourage, like I said, the letter to go out to also go to the League of California Cities.
Okay. And can we vote on the item 2, on adopting that legislative platform, including the
Move item
language
2.
About
Second.
First 5? Thank you. Okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. And now item 4, people want to take that off. Will you read the title of that, please?
Item number 4, contract for design services for the Carrillo-Anacapa intersection traffic safety improvements project.
Okay. Mr. Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I asked to have this taken off the consent calendar based on my reading of the report. I had a little discussion with Mr. Wozniak yesterday, and he provided me with some email answers, but I thought it would be useful to go over this in public. My main concern is, obviously, I have every desire to improve our intersections and reduce accidents. I don't have a desire to move traffic calming into every operation the city does in city streets. So I look forward to hearing to this report.
Oh, we're going to have a report on this. Okay, Mr. Allen. Yeah.
We weren't planning on making a report. If there's some, I can give you a brief overview of why we're doing this particular project. And basically, in looking at the various intersections in our city where we have problems, this intersection, Carrillo and Anacapa Street, is one of the top intersections in terms of collisions. In fact, it probably is the number one intersection. We have identified in the transportation planning and operations as the number one intersection we need to address. The primary number of collisions we have there are basically people running red lights. That's the number one cause of intersections. In looking at the data, we've had 62 collisions from December 31st of 2003 and through December 31st of 2007 in a 4-year period of time. So it is quite substantial. We hired Penfield and Smith to do a traffic safety analysis of that intersection. We identified this as being a problem. We gave them the collision data. We told them to go out and take a look at it and tell us how we can resolve the problems we're experiencing at this intersection. We didn't have any preconceived idea of how we would like to address it. We thought maybe we need to put mast arms in, but we weren't sure. So they did the analysis, they did some site observations, and they came back with a recommendation that we took to the Transportation and Circulation Committee as well as the Historic Landmarks Commission. And what they are recommending is that we move forward with putting mast arms on Carrillo Street for both directions. We have red light running. 44% of the red lighting or the collisions is heading westbound towards State Street. If I think everybody's familiar with Carrillo Street, there's a lot of ficus trees. So the signals are kind of blending into the background. We've had Parks and Recreation have trimmed the trees. We've looked at signal time. We've done everything we can from a non-capital expense to address that problem, and then we're now faced with doing this type of improvement. 28% of the collisions is southbound Anacapa Street, and a lot of those are, again, running the red light. They looked at the location of the traffic signal for southbound Anacapa Street, and the one on the east side of the street is right, if you're familiar with the Carrillo Rec Center, it's basically in front of the Rec Center. So there's poor visibility of that traffic signal. So Penfield and Smith came up with a recommendation. You can basically kill two birds with one stone. You put curb extensions in. They're able to move the traffic signal from its current location and give it better visibility on Anacapa Street, and that would avoid putting a mast arm on Anacapa Street. An added benefit is we're decreasing the pedestrian crossing district, but it's not being put in for traffic calming reasons. It's being put in to improve the visibility of the traffic signal with a benefit to the pedestrians. And so that's the primary reason we're doing this project. We have received preliminary approval from the Historic Landmarks Commission. As everybody knows, they don't particularly like mast arms in the downtown, but they see the benefit from a traffic safety reason we're doing it. They also see the benefit of putting the curb extensions in so we can improve the visibility of the traffic signal for southbound traffic on Anacapa Street. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So there's still going to be mast arms?
We're going to have mast arms on Carrillo Street in both directions because we can't put curb extensions on that street because of the truck traffic and the bus traffic. This doesn't work from a turning radius standpoint, and that's where we have our number one collision because of the large canopy of the ficus trees, and the traffic signals, frankly, are just blending into the background.
Right.
So we need to improve the visibility of the traffic signals on Carrillo Street, and the best way that our designer came up with that is to put the mast arms in. And as I think everybody knows, it's a 4-lane road, 2 lanes in each direction. So, it does make sense that you have to put a mast arm in. If you go further down Carrillo Street, at Chapala Street, and further on, we have mast arms on that street. So I think part of the problem is people are expecting mast arms on that street, but there's not one at this location.
Right. And when I looked at this, obviously I have no objection to making the signal lights clearer. That makes perfect sense. My problem is with incorporating curb extensions into a major intersection in the city and I can tell you I get lots of email about lots of topics. I don't get emails from people saying, I wish we had more curb bulb outs in Santa Barbara. And the fact that in the report it acknowledges that curb extensions are a problem for large vehicles, I think that says something in general about the advisability of putting curb extensions in downtown. And personally, in order to improve signal light visibility, I'd be happy to live with a slightly longer mast arm and not intruding the curbs into the middle of a major intersection. That's how I see it.
Well, in this particular case, it wouldn't be putting a longer mast arm on Anacapa Street. We'd be actually adding another mast arm, so we would be adding a third mast arm on Anacapa Street.
Okay.
In terms of cost savings, if that's a concern, there's not really a substantial dollar amount savings by curb extension versus mast arm because we're going to have to replace the pole to put a heavier pole in that can withhold the mast arm. So it's not going to be a dollar and cent savings by not putting a curb extension in. It's just more of an aesthetic issue that we knew the concern of the community and the Historic Landmarks Commission about putting a number of mast arms in. So we're trying to minimize that and improve the visibility of the traffic signal for southbound traffic on Anacapa Street.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I ask also, it's a pedestrian countdown to light, right? Because we don't have one there now. Are we going to have that?
We're going to have that too, and it won't be a push button. It'll just be go with the signal as it turns green. We'll have pedestrian countdown timing for all legs, at the intersection as well.
Okay, that's good because I walk that way a lot going to the courthouse or to the county administration building. I'm never quite sure when the light's green whether it's been there a long time or what. So I think the pedestrian countdown will help. I've personally witnessed at least 2 different accidents, and I saw one of the traffic lights taken out by some vehicle. I don't know what it was, but I think that's kind of a wild corner in some ways with the bank right there too. So I'm pleased to support this, but we do have a couple of people who want to speak. Do you want to?
Just a quick question.
Okay, Ms.
For
Falcone?
clarification,
Sure.
the bulb outs that you are suggesting that they study, because this is only to fund the study. This isn't approving anything or components of anything.
Councilmember Falcone, what this is approving, we've already done the study. Penfield and Smith did the conceptual study.
This is the design of...
Approving final design so we can prepare construction documents and go out to bid, and this would be coming back to council for award a contract. John Wozniak staff will actually be managing this contract.
Will there be, okay, well, that raises another question for me, but will there be a time at which we can say we like these elements of the design, we don't, or are we essentially doing that this moment? I need a moment of finality because I'm not a happy camper about bulb outs.
Well, if that's the direction of the council, we can do as a bid alternate a mast arm on Anacapa Street versus the curb extensions, but we did these are the various alternatives in terms of design. We did that before the Transportation and Circulation Committee, as well as the Historic Landmarks Commission.
But not us.
Not with the council. Typically, that's where we normally would do that.
Point of clarification, the corner that is Anacapa and Carrillo, if one is headed east, turning south, where the bank is,
right,
and the drive-in in the bank is a problem. Is that a corner that's contemplated for an extension?
No.
Okay, that is not specifically the corner.
Yeah, the 2 corners that we're putting curb extensions on are opposite of the street.
On the opposite side.
In front of the Carrillo Rec Center, and you go directly across Carrillo Street. Those are just those 2. The other ones, we're not doing it because we have the MTD buses, and we were trying to prevent MTD buses from going into oncoming traffic.
I want to be really clear that that particular corner is not being contemplated on any level for...
There were a variety of concerns.
I drive that every day.
Well, I drive occasionally too. There were a variety of concerns with doing a curb extension in that location, including the driveway for the bank and from some other things, and that's something that we decided was not something we wanted to try to address with this project.
Okay, well...
Okay, thank you. Michael Self will be followed by Kellum DeForest. Is Kellum here still? Yeah. Oh, you're right there. Okay, thank you. I'm just silly. And then the last speaker will be Frank Hotchkiss. Michael?
Mayor and Council, thank you for the opportunity to speak. As President of Santa Barbara Safe Streets, I'd like to request 1 minute more, and I'll go fast. This is not the time to do unnecessary street remodels. The piggy bank is empty. I understand that 12 planners in the traffic division want to keep busy. After all, these 12 workers cost the city $1 million a year. That does not count the administrators, the managers, the clerical, or anybody else in the traffic department, just the planners. And it does not count pension and benefits. That's quite a hit for our city budget. Councilman Dale Francisco a few weeks ago asked the traffic division if they had a list of priority intersections and was told no, this was not available now, but they were working on it. It would be wise and prudent to do a thorough analysis of our street grid before this or any other project is approved. The intersection accident data supplied by staff to the Transportation Circulation Committee was an incomplete assessment. The number of accidents alone does not tell you that the intersection is inherently the worst. You have to consider volume and several other things before that assessment is made. Excuse me. Staff's testimony at the TCC indicated that signal lights were ill-timed and the trees obstructed the signal lights from the driver's view. Now, I just went by this intersection, and from the TCC meeting where this appeared to today, it doesn't appear the trees have been noticeably trimmed, because that seemed to be the issue with the lights. In this city, we have lots of maintenance that needs to be taken care of, broken sidewalks, potholes, and many other projects that require maintenance. We elected you to spend our tax dollars responsibly. We're in dire financial straits and respectfully request that this project be placed on hold until such time that we can discern what our actual needs are. You recently approved up to $500,000 for the Upper State Street transit-only lane. About 3 months ago, you approved another $500,000 to be spent for loops to count cycle riders on a few city streets. The list of unnecessary, frivolous projects approved this year would paper the walls of these chambers. Please, rather than increasing our burden by raising fees and taxes, as you are already doing, stop spending.
Thank you. Thank you. Kellen DeForest will be followed by last speaker will be Frank Hotchkiss.
Good afternoon. You've heard from myself, but you also heard earlier from the budgetary problems the city is facing, and that city employees are afraid they're going to be laid off. So why is this, and I heard what city staff just said, but why is the city staff asking for this to execute this contract at this time? Can it wait? I mean, I don't know how 62 collisions doesn't seem like too many, and I don't know whether any of those were fatalities. People are going pretty slowly on both Chapala, both Carrillo and Anacapa streets. It is the projected bulb outs that are the most egregious, because they will just foul up the traffic even more. And I would think the traffic light problem could be easily solved, but I don't know. I've never had any trouble seeing the traffic lights. I mean, people that have had too much to drink might, but I don't think we're trying to cater to them. Also, 2 years ago, this council voted to revisit the roundabouts and bulb outs that have been put in the city, especially on the Upper East Side, to determine whether these street obstructions are are doing what they're set out to do, or are they unsafe and thereby causing more accidents? Please don't spend any more money for something that isn't that badly needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hotchkiss.
Thank you. Council members, Mayor, hi. I echo what both Michael and Kellum said. This seems to be a ready, fire, aim solution to a corner that's, while accident-prone, perhaps not the worst, or we don't even know. If, in fact, it's a problem with people running red lights, there's a much easier solution, which is to delay the time between a light going red and the opposing light going green. So there's simply a pause there where there's nothing that happens at all there. That costs us nothing. I do think bulb outs are not a solution, and trimming trees would certainly be a lot less expensive. So when we're a council that's trying to address serious fiscal problems, these solutions might be tried first before we proceed with something far more expensive. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no more speakers, and we're still on the consent calendar, just to let everybody know. So let's see what we can do here. Mr. Williams and then Mr. House.
I think people aren't listening very carefully. The solution of trimming the trees has already been attempted. It has not worked. If the concern is funds, staff has just articulated that the streetlight changes that would be necessary if you didn't have a bulb out are just as expensive as having the bulb out. So it doesn't save us any money to not have the bulb out. And I think everybody here that has spoken is very aware that this is not general fund money and therefore could not save the positions that are under threat. This is not general fund money. And I also would just challenge people, if the concern is to impede traffic, these are on the east side of the street of a one-way street. Mm-hmm. The east side. The only people that this would impede are people who are driving the wrong way on Anacapa and trying to turn right onto Carrillo, or people who are going west on Carrillo that are trying to turn the wrong way up Anacapa. So if we're only impeding traffic of people who are driving the wrong way on a one-way street, I'm not sure that that's a problem. So I could see if the design was done wrong, Mr. Francisco, and it was an overly large bulb out, how it might have a worse effect than that. And I would be personally pledged to look at that closely with you. But I think that this is okay right now, and the final design will come back to us, and we can look at it then.
Okay, thank you. Mr. House?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I know we're still on consent. Just very quickly, though, for Mr. Allen. Mr. Allen, if I understand correctly, the placement of the bulb outs of this that we're discussing here are near the Carrillo Rec Center on that side of the street. Correct? I want to be sure I really got it right. And okay, so that I understand now the wrong way movement conundrum there. In any case, what's the benefit of a roundabout? Or of a bulb out? What's the benefit of a bulb out? What's the purpose for bothering?
Well, there's in this particular case, there's two benefits. You know, when you look at some of the other curb extensions we have put in, it's reducing the crossing distance for pedestrians walking across the street, so they're in traffic a shorter period of time. In this particular intersection, we're going to be able to do that. But one of the primary benefits on this is on Anacapa Street for the southbound movement, and the traffic signals that's on the east side by the Carrillo Rec Center, you have poor visibility of that traffic signal. So we can move that traffic signal from its current location, which basically is in front of the rec center, over into the parkway on Anacapa Street and put it in the curb extension where we'll still have some protection from vehicles and give better visibility of that traffic signal for southbound traffic.
Got it.
The option, if we do not do that, is then to put a master arm on Anacapa Street to get better visibility of that traffic signal, similar to what we did on Anacapa Street at Victoria Street.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Another good example, just recently, where we avoided putting a master arm on a city street, is the traffic signal that the city installed a few years ago on Santa Barbara Street at Ortega Street. Right. We have proposed putting on a master arm in on that location, and the Historic Landmarks Commission didn't want a master arm in. We sat down and re-looked at it. We sat down with the engineering as well as our transportation engineer at the time, Mr. Clifford, and we came up with the curb extensions. Instead of putting a master arm in, where we're able to move these signals out to give better visibility. You know, we have to follow the manual and uniform traffic control devices in terms of what the visibility is of a traffic signal for cars driving down the road. So that was an option that we came up with to avoid putting a master arm in, and that was something that the Historic Landmarks Commission appreciated, that we were able to do that instead of putting a master arm in.
Great, thank you. To me, I mean, that's an example where you've got the academy with all the kids that are going to school there. They're spending less time in the street exposed to the cars. Same thing here. You've got seniors and others going to classes at Carrillo Rec Center. They're, once again, they're not in the middle. They're not in the street taking as much time to get across, so it's safer for them. They're more visible. The light's more visible. I mean, there's benefits all the way around, and yet discretion's being used on the other corners where it would actually affect possibly the turning of the large vehicles that use the other corners all the time. I just think you got it right, and I really want to commend you and your staff for taking the initiative on this and using Measure D funds as they were intended to be used, and also the Streets Capital Fund, which, by the way, is a very long and difficult process to get through. And when we look at our capital program, it's not just a short 2-year program, it's one that has a 6-year horizon, and we really do plan out in advance for these so when the funding becomes available, we can take advantage of it. But you're looking out for the safety and for the functionality of this intersection, and I just really commend you for your work.
Yeah, and I just want to say this is a public safety issue as far as I'm concerned for both the car drivers. 62 collisions, somebody said that's not very many, but I think it's a huge number for one intersection over 4 years. But that's, you know, that's way too many. That's 62 too many. And I know that some of them cost us money because they take out street lights or all kinds of stuff. And some of them are real accidents where people get hurt. So I think it's a public safety issue. It's a safety issue for the drivers. That, you know, our streets should be safer than this. And it's a safety issue for the pedestrians. I've been a pedestrian there, and I want to know how much time I have if I have time to cross the street. And so I will be voting for this. I think it's a good idea. Mr. Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to be clear about what it is that I'm concerned about with this. Obviously, I'm in favor of better signal visibility. I'm in favor of people not running red lights. I'm in favor of a pedestrian timer that lets you know, because I agree, I've seen the same problem at that intersection. You can't tell how long the signal's been green. So I think that's a great improvement. And also, with regards to what Mr. Williams said, of course, this doesn't present a turning problem the way the bulb outs say at Gutierrez and Chapala does, the one that forces buses and trucks to swerve into the lane next to them in order to negotiate the turn. And I'm glad that the city has taken that into account. However, there is still no good justification for moving the sidewalk out further into major arterial streets. The straight-ahead traffic will still be coming up against a curb that is now whatever it will be, 4 or 5 feet further out than it was before. That is my problem. The problem is extending curbs into the middle of arterials. I think that's a bad policy. And everything else about this, better signals, better pedestrian, all that stuff is great. It's just we could achieve this without a bulb out. And if we were having this discussion 5 years ago, it never would have occurred to anybody to solve it by moving the curb further into the middle of an arterial street. And that's why I can't support it.
I have to say, we could vote on this, but, you know, we're kind of running out of time a little bit, but there is no indication, and this is an engineering design services that we're looking at, there's no indication that a bulb out would go into the middle of an arterial. I think that's really, if you go up to any of the bulb outs, they don't go 4 or 5 feet into the arterial. They go, what they do is they take out the parking, where the parking would have been, and at the corner, and so it allows the pedestrians to be better seen. And I would not be in favor of a bulb out that went into the middle of the street. I think that would be crazy. So, you know, I think you might be exaggerating a bit.
You know
Mr.
what?
Williams.
I just wanted to say that if the bulb out is 4 or 5 feet out, I will vote against the design with you, Mr. Francisco.
Me too. You got two of us.
So I'll move.
I haven't seen engineering drawings.
I'll move staff recommendation.
Okay. Is there a second? Second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay. Okay, let's go on to item 5. We're also taking that off. Mr. Prince, go ahead and read the title of it. And then.
Item number 5, adoption of ordinance for amendments to the 2007 Fire Code.
Okay, Mr. Francisco. This was on the ordinance committee, and then it was on the city council last week.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
It's the second time, yeah.
I think that the fire department, Mr. Poiré, and others did an excellent job in outreach on this proposed residential fire sprinkler ordinance. I think they did the best job I could, but as they could. But as I said earlier today in a conversation with Mr. Poiret, sometimes when people see something in the newspaper, that's the first time they ever really notice it. And I've gotten a lot of email and phone calls about the fire sprinkler ordinance with, I think, some rational questions about it. And what I would like to propose is that we continue this for 30 days or whatever feasible date staff can arrive that's close to that, to allow us to answer those remaining factual questions to everyone's satisfaction, because I want people to understand that the whole point of this is public safety. That's why we make changes to the building code, is improvements to public safety or public health, and that there's no hidden agenda. We're not trying to stifle the building of houses in Santa Barbara. And I think that some legitimate questions have been raised that I didn't automatically have the answer to off the top of my head. And I just want to make sure that people are confident that we're taking into account the economy as well as some ideal of public safety.
Okay. So did you want us to?
So I would move that we continue this item for 30 days, or for whatever amount of time staff determines, given all the other priorities that we have to do, that we continue this item 30 days to allow us to answer questions from the public, and working with the fire department, making sure that those questions are taken care of before we put this back on the calendar.
Okay, I'd like to ask the city attorney, though. We have, this is an ordinance that went through the ordinance committee, then it came to the city council. They voted for it last week, and so this is the second voting for it. So if we put the second voting for it off 30 days, can you tell us, do we have to go back to have the, just if you could kind of explain, I've never seen this before.
No, Madam Mayor, the city charter, the only requirement here is that there be not less than 7 days between the introduction and of an ordinance,
Okay.
a non-emergency ordinance like this, not less than 7 days between introduction and adoption. So to continue this for 30 days would not violate the charter, for example.
Okay, thank you. That's what I needed to hear.
That being said, I'll second that motion.
Okay. Discussion. Do you have any questions for our staff? Otherwise, we'll go ahead and have a discussion up here.
I don't believe I have any questions.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, I have my light on.
Yeah, go ahead. Mr.
Yeah, I had
Gordon.
some questions that came up even last night on this, which I would like a little more time to answer. So for me, having a few more days on it is actually a benefit.
Okay.
And so that's why I seconded the motion.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Schneider, it's a question?
I guess also to go to the city attorney, if in those 30 days, however, if there are issues that come up and you want to change the ordinance, then we have to go back and reintroduce it or take away the introduction of the vote last week. Is that correct?
That's correct. And this is the normal legislative process, and despite the fact that we typically introduce ordinances on the consent agenda, the point of having two readings is to allow public comment, for example, and to allow the council to make changes. And but if changes are made at the adoption date, then an ordinance has to be reintroduced. That's true of state laws, of any other city's ordinances. So yes, if within this time period, if the council does do that, if changes are made in the ordinance, it might have to be reintroduced.
Okay. And depending on what those changes are, that might have to go back to the ordinance committee or back to the council, because if it's a simple change, it could be done at the council level. You wouldn't have to go to the ordinance committee, although if it was more complex, it may need to go to the ordinance committee. Is that correct?
The decision of whether the changes would need to go back to the ordinance committee is strictly up to the council.
Okay.
It doesn't happen.
So just a question for Mr. Francisco on the questions that you've received from the public. Are you foreseeing that changes are needed in the ordinance, or you just want to explain what's currently in the current ordinance before making a final vote?
I hope no changes are necessary, but I'll give you just one example of the kind of questions. The typical, and I don't want to go into too many little details here, but the typical size, the inlet size on a water meter, or the service side of the house is 5/8 inch. That's standard. And some people argue that the flow rate necessary for a functioning residential fire sprinkler system is inadequately served by that, and that it would require the next size up, which in this city is 1.5 inches. which has a higher monthly service charge. It has a higher fee for installing it in the first place. And so the question is, are there actually hidden costs here that really weren't fully explored? Now, Mr. Poiré, correct me if I'm wrong, your position in this is that it won't require the larger meter.
Yeah. Francisco, that's correct. In fact, we have numerous sprinkler systems in residences, single-family homes throughout the city. The reason that it's so hard to speak to specifics is because each one is calculated by a fire protection engineer, and each home is a little bit different. But in the past several years,
You got it. Thank you.
we've approved numerous homes for in lieu of access and other types of things like that. And I, in memory, can't remember anyone not meeting it on a 5/8" meter.
Okay. So, for instance, what we might be forced to do, if we want this to happen, but there were cases where you would have to go to a larger meter, maybe we'd have to specify, for instance, you aren't going to charge someone the typical higher fee for that meter just because you wanted it for fire safety.
Well,
That's the sort of
Wouldn't that be
thing.
part of the fee? I mean, is the fee in the ordinance? No.
No.
So it would be, okay.
Yeah.
I guess here's where I'm coming from. We're going through the consent item by item by item, and I know there were a number of stakeholder meetings when it came to this ordinance. It went through ordinance committee. It went through council. It's unfortunate that the press didn't, for whatever reason, mention it ahead of time, if that's why people were complaining to us since last week. If it's a public safety issue on a product that is only applicable when people remodel their homes, it's not retroactive to people in their house today, but it's when they're looking into the building and safety codes. I'm not quite sure why we can answer questions, and if we want to change the ordinance, we can then at that point change the ordinance. But I just want to be cognizant of staff time and the process involved in putting ordinances together, because it's a lot of time that's taken away from other things if really all the questions are being answered. So if it's 30 days to answer questions and everyone's happy with it, that's one thing. If it's going to mean a whole lot of a whole change of an ordinance that we all thought was fine last week, I'm going to have concerns with that. So I'm just a little cautious of where this might be heading with every other ordinance that then comes up here.
Okay, Mr. Williams?
I just want to remind the colleagues that it is now almost 3:30 and we are only midway through the consent calendar. So if we want to get the business done, including our budget, I think we need to cut some corners here. And I think if I've supported this ordinance every way through the process thus far, but if Mr. Francisco and Mr. Horton want a little bit more time, I think that's a reasonable thing to ask for. That's okay, and I'd be happy to grant them that extra time.
Yeah. Yeah,
and I think we
feel
should
the
stop
same way.
speaking and vote.
Okay, but we've got one speaker slip, and that's Frank Hotchkiss.
Thank you. I appreciate your recommendation, Mr. Francisco. In fact, it was the one I was going to make. And one of the things I ask you to address in your 30 days, and I'm going to quote here, and believe me, I'm just getting the wording. It says that sprinklers will be necessary, item number 4, in any residential structure where an addition or a remodel exceeds 1,000 square feet or 50% of the floor area. What's not clear in that wording is, does that apply just to the new addition? That's certainly one way you can interpret it. Or does it apply to the entire house, which is another way that it also could be interpreted. I think that needs to be specified, and I suspect that there will be tremendous resistance in both the real estate and the homeowner community. If in fact people are asked to retrofit their entire house, it becomes an enormous expense, and in some cases a violation of an aesthetic if it's an open beam ceiling, for instance. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm willing to give you 30 days because I've had some questions, and I think some of them are a little bit strange. People thinking that we have to put roof sprinklers on and that sort of thing. So I don't think people understand this. I think it's a shame that it wasn't followed when we had all these discussions. I mean, there were
and
a
questions
lot of
like the last
discussions.
one, Madam Mayor, that was answered, that
Yeah,
were answered
I
during
know.
the ordinance committee process.
So maybe we could come up with I don't know what we should do, but in these 30 days, maybe just kind of a what does this ordinance do type of thing so that we could put it on our webpage or something like that. I think that would be helpful, if that's okay with you. I don't want you to spend a lot of time, but you're so familiar with it, I don't think it would take a lot of time.
Madam Mayor, members of
Yeah.
the council, Ron
Chief.
Prince, Fire Chief, I would recommend that if more questions have emerged that haven't already been answered, or even ones that seem to be the common questions, we'd be more than happy to come up with the frequently asked questions
Yeah.
and then the answers. We could post them on the website.
I think that would
we
be
could
very
do
helpful.
another staff report. But I think these are questions that we've certainly contemplated and we certainly have good answers for. And I think it's certainly our responsibility to continue on with our mission, which is to try to recommend this type of legislation. And I think it's appropriate legislation, but I feel comfortable with certainly providing more answers to questions that continue to emerge. At some point, we'll have to make a decision.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. And I need a motion and a second for the consent.
Move the rest of the consent.
Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you very much. And I just wanted to point out a recruitment for advisory groups. We're accepting applications now at the clerk's office through May 22nd. And you can do that online, too, now. So we can do that, and that would be good. We will be making our decisions about vacancies, about filling the vacancies, I think it's Tuesday, June 30th. I just saw that. Very good. Okay, report from the Ordinance Committee. Mr. Williams.
Today, the Ordinance Committee met for an hour and 55 minutes to discuss the tree preservation policy recommendations and the changes to our Ordinance Committee or our Municipal Code chapters 15.20 and 15.24, specifically to help us increase and protect the health of our urban forest. And those recommendations will be coming to council shortly.
And I wanted to commend you for that because I watched part of it on television. It was a very good hearing. I mean, you were really working hard, and I appreciate it.
We all worked really closely together on that one.
Good. I thought it was going to be a little more contentious, but it really, what it was everybody was thinking about the trees. There you go. Near Arbor Day, so that worked.
Thank you, Madam
Finance Committee.
Madam Mayor, the Finance Committee met today at 12:30. We reviewed the proposed budget calendar and recommended that on to the full council.
Okay, thank you very much. Item number 11, will you please read it for us?
Item number 11, set a date for public hearing regarding appeals of Architectural Board of Review, preliminary approval for 1298 Coast Village Road.
Okay, I think we've seen this one before. Haven't we? Okay, do we have a date?
Madam Mayor, members of
yes. Cindy.
Members of the City Council, last week staff did receive a consensus from the applicant and the two appellants on a date and time to hold the public hearing, which is June 2nd. So at this time, staff is recommending that you set June 2nd, 2009 at 6 p.m. as the hearing date.
Move staff recommendation.
Second.
Well, we have a speaker slip, though.
Oh no, we don't want. If it's Doug or Tony, we don't want to see. We don't want to see you for another
They're
couple
in the
weeks.
way. They go, not me, not me. I have Michael Self. She left.
And was in agreement once I told her what the agreement was.
Oh, okay. Okay, she probably thought it was something else. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed. Yahoo. Okay. Who says we don't do anything up here? We set dates over 4 meetings or something. Okay, item 12. Go ahead. Do you want to take a quick stand-up break? Okay, but 2 minutes. We'll make it 5. Okay. And then we'll be back. Thank you. Council meeting. Will you please, shh, thank you. I don't know why that works, but it does. Will you please read item number 12 for us?
Item number 12, fiscal year 2010 recommended operating and capital budget.
Okay. This should be a quick item.
Yes. Okay, any questions?
No questions.
Madam Mayor and members of the council, in accordance with section 604 of the city charter, I'm pleased to present to you today the proposed budget for fiscal year 2010. This has been, I think, one of the most difficult budgets I've ever been involved with, and it's really been an interesting journey. As you know, about 8 months ago, we started to see a major economic downturn, and most folks say we're in the worst recession since the Great Depression. Unemployment has soared, and many of our country's major financial institutions have either failed or required massive infusions of cash from the federal government. Credit markets have frozen, and consumer confidence has fallen dramatically. And due to the rapid decline of the stock market, the net worth of Americans has declined by trillions of dollars. There's been a sharp decline in investment spending, consumer spending, and travel. From a governmental finance standpoint, public agencies throughout the country are facing sharp declines in most key tax revenues, such as retail sales taxes, income taxes, property taxes, and in our case also bed taxes. In my conversations with colleagues from throughout the state, I'm typically hearing about city budget deficits that range from 5 to 20% of general fund expenditures. And as you'll see in our presentation today, our general deficit or projected deficit, had we done nothing, would be in the 10% range, which is very similar to what I'm hearing from other coastal cities in California. It seems to be a lot worse in the Central Valley, where the mortgage situation and the subprime situation is much worse. The budget that we're presenting today is truly a cooperative effort that began over 6 months ago. Over that period, nearly all of the department heads and other key staff members have been meeting weekly to deal with the problems caused by the economy and develop the budget we're presenting today. I can't tell you how proud I am of the cooperative way in which the various departments approach this process. And your senior managers have really worked together rather than trying to be parochial in their own budget situations, and it's really made the process work much better than it could have been. Our first goal as we put together the budget was to minimize service cuts to the public. And although this budget does include service impacts in nearly every department of the city, I'm pleased with the overall balance of the plan. There is a little pain everywhere, but I don't think that the overall quality of services to the community in general will suffer too much. And this is a very, very delicate balance between all of those competing priorities, and I'm sure that you'll add your fine-tuning to this process over the next couple of months. Our second goal was to avoid layoffs wherever possible. As you'll see today when we're reviewing this plan, we are proposing that approximately 52 positions be eliminated. Of those, approximately 22 are currently filled and may require layoffs. We are working very diligently with each individual employee to find them other positions in the city, to accommodate in individual retirement plans, and to try and find them a soft landing. And we're hopeful we can reduce that number down considerably. And as you heard today, we're also negotiating with the various employee organizations to try and generate additional savings that we would recommend be applied back to reduce service cuts and also save positions. It's important to remember that each of these employees is a human being with a family and their own specific financial situations. And I think it's important that we don't refer to them as slots or bodies or positions. They're human beings, and they're affected by the decisions we make. In preparing the budget, I want to stress that it's been carefully crafted and balanced. Unfortunately, as a result, it is a plan of shared pain. Every department in the city is affected by the recommendations. But I think you'll find in no case that we've gone too far. And I want you to know we don't take pleasure in making the recommendations included in this budget, but we feel it's a responsible budget and it addresses the situation honestly and is fiscally sound. We are also proposing reductions to most of the community-based organizations that receive funding from the city. with the exception of the Human Service Grant recipients. Again, I believe the proposals are balanced and the pain is shared, and no organization is impacted too much. As the council hears a presentation today, and as you go through the department presentations over the next few weeks, I encourage you to be patient and take the time to understand the full situation. There will be a tendency to immediately react to one small portion of the plan and say that a certain recommendation is unacceptable. And it's my strong recommendation that you wait till you've immersed yourself in the entire budget so you can understand the balance we've tried to create. As I said recently at the State of the City organization, there's often a tendency during these times to attack the messenger or to look for easy fixes. Or there's a tendency to look at a specific recommendation without looking at the broader context. I hope over the next 2 months we can get beyond this tendency and work constructively on solving a real problem with a strong emphasis on maintaining the quality of life that we have in the community. And I'd now like to turn it over to Bob Pearson to go over the details of the budget. And I also want to especially acknowledge the finance staff who has gone to tremendous lengths to put this document together. The last 2 weekends they were here all weekend. There were a couple of folks that were here last night until 2:30 in the morning putting the budget together. They've really done a tremendous job. So, but they've done just a heck of a job. So let me turn over to Bob.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of council. Bob Pearson, Finance Director, and as Jim said, I'm going to take you through some of the numbers and an overview. I want to stress that today's presentation is not in any way intended to be a detailed presentation on the various components of the budget. That will come as we go through the various department review meetings, as Jim said, over the next 4 to 6 weeks. Today's presentation is intended to give you an overview, and I'm also going to focus pretty much exclusively, and I think you'll understand why, on the general fund. The enterprise funds will, of course, be covered in detail as part of the related department presentations. So Public Works will cover water and wastewater and parking, et cetera. And, of course, Waterfront and Airport will have their own departmental presentations. But because the budget difficulties that we are experiencing are focused most heavily in the general fund, that is going to be the focus of today's presentation. Jim already mentioned the charter requirement. We are required to submit on or before May 1st. It's been our practice in the past and continued this year to try to get to you at least a week, if not 2, before that deadline to extend the amount of time available for your consideration and the community's consideration of the budget. And, of course, I think that was as important this year as ever. Normally at this time we would be coming to you with a 2-year financial plan, but as I know we told you back in January during a work session we had with you then, because of the uncertainty of the current economic environment, we felt we were having enough difficulty looking out 15 or 16 months, let alone adding another year to that. And with that uncertainty, we felt that doing a 2-year financial plan at this time, that the second year of that 2-year financial plan would really just be a shot in the dark and would not be worth the extra effort to do at this time. My budget presentation today is, I'm sorry, but about an hour probably. We're going to go over some citywide totals, and then we're going to go to the general fund where we're going to talk about revenues, defining the problem, the balancing strategy, an overview of expenditures, and then positions, and then the capital program, and then conclude with a look at a couple remaining budget challenges, as well as reminding the council and the public of the upcoming public hearing schedule. So with that, some citywide operating and capital program budget information, the standard pie fest that you're used to seeing in the past. We'll start with the total citywide sources and uses of funds, and this is the recommended general fund budget. It has about $104.5 million of revenue, an operating budget of $103 million, capital of $1.3 million, for total uses of $104.5. So neither the use of reserves nor any surplus or deficit generated. Special revenue funds, another category of funds. We have budgeted use of reserves of $773,000, essentially for capital. Total revenue for the operating of the special revenue funds of just shy of $65 million. Operating budget of $54.4 million. Capital of $11.4 million, and again, balanced with the use of reserves for capital at about $65.8 million. And special revenue funds include things like the redevelopment agency and our Measure D fund, soon to be Measure A fund, and those kinds of things. The enterprise funds, water, wastewater, parking, airport, waterfront, golf. Use of reserves of just short of $6 million, and again, for capital. Revenue of $85.3 million for total sources of $91.3. Operating budget $77 million, capital $14.1. And you see, because of the way the various funds that are consolidated into this column, there actually is a fund in there that's generating a $75,000 surplus, not the same fund that's using reserves at the top for capital. Internal service funds, you'll recall that's information systems, risk management, building maintenance, motor pool. They are essentially enterprise funds whose customer base are other city operations. We have, again, use of reserves of about $400,000 for capital. Total revenue, $19 million. Operating budget, almost $17 million. Capital of $2.3 million, and no surplus generated there. The citywide total sources, $281 million, $280 million, $81 million of uses, and that's just a sum of those four fund types that you see to the left. But essentially, a $280 million budget next year, including operations and capital. It's kind of amazing. I think of it in terms of a little more than $250 million. In terms of the allocation of those monies between those various fund types, you can see that the general fund is now 43%.
Does that double count the monies that we pay to other funds?
Ourselves, yes, it does. And in the sources and uses of funds schedule in the budget document, we subtotal it there, and then below that we do subtract out the inter-fund transactions to arrive at a net number.
Thank you.
So yes, it does, and it's a considerable number. The total general fund, is 43%, enterprise is 30%, special revenue 20%, and internal service. I think the interesting thing to me about this is it was probably 10 years ago that the general fund represented 50% of the city's budget. Citywide capital program, $29.1 million. You see the general fund is $1.3 million. Special revenue funds, streets, RDA, Measure B, and the utility undergrounding. And the bulk of the capital program is in the city's enterprise funds, with the water fund leading the way, about $5.3 million. Airport fund 3.2. Point out to you, in case you would note it, that obviously that does not include the capital project for the airport terminal, which will be separately budgeted because it's bond funds. And then the internal service funds, the intra-city services fund at $2.2 million. Large majority of that is the city's vehicle replacement program. And again, another way to look at the capital program, you can see that the enterprise funds represent just over half of the citywide capital program. The general fund represents about 5%. Moving on now to the general fund. As I mentioned, a one-year budget. As Jim mentioned, we have recently, in the last 9 months or so, a little more maybe, seen some historic declines in some of our key general fund revenues. We do continue to experience increased costs, and I know we had some discussion under public comment earlier in the meeting today, but the bulk of those increased costs relate to the increased labor costs that relate to existing MOUs, some of which were negotiated more than a year ago. We all are aware of the depleted budget reserve. You know that based on our policy, it should be about $10.5 million, and it's about $950,000. I do want to add that is, as you well know, but the public might not, that is not the extent of the general fund's reserves. We have a fully funded $16.5 million disaster reserve, as well as our infamous $1 million capital reserve, which is fully funded. But the budget reserve, as we all know, is underfunded and almost depleted. As Jim mentioned also, in order to balance this budget, we've required about $10 million of adjustments It is a one-year solution because we don't know what fiscal year 11 will bring yet. And with the economy being what it is, certainly a significant number of uncertainties remain. This is another look at the general fund budget. We have the current year, FY09, adopted budget, and this I'm going to do some comparisons for you. The operating of the current year operating revenue from the current year adopted budget was about $109.4 million. We had an operating budget of $108 million, a capital of $1.4 million, and it was balanced at $109.4 million. Now, this next column that I add is entitled FY 2010 Projected. Now, for those of you on the council, I know you will know what I'm talking about when I say that essentially this is the FY 10 column from our multi-year forecast. So when we were doing our multi-year forecast a year ago, these are the numbers that we projected to be for fiscal year 2010. And this really becomes our baseline as we head into the budget development process for the FY10 budget that you're now getting today. This is really what we measure against. And you can see that we were expecting, as compared to the 09 adopted budget, a couple things worth noting. One is the use of reserves, $2.5 million. We knew that when we adopted the FY09 budget, which was balanced, we knew that we had included $2.5 million of one-time solutions in that 09 budget. We knew that it was unlikely that we would be able to tap those same sorts of one-time revenues again in 2010, and we accepted that because we thought that, frankly, on a $109 or $10 million budget, we would be able to deal with a $2.5 million gap without really too much trouble. But, of course, the economy changed the game completely. And so you can see that the operating revenues, we were projecting operating revenues to go up about $2.4 million from 109.4 to 111.8. And as you know, and we'll see in more detail momentarily, that simply did not happen. You also notice that the operating budget was projected to go up about $4 million. In fact, almost $4.5 million. About $3.5 million of that increase was due to increased labor costs. The capital budget was due to go up about $500,000, and as you have seen just a moment ago, and we'll see in more detail again, that's not going to be at that level as we're in the recommended budget. So that is what we were looking at as we began the development of the 2010 budget. Now I'm going to add the final column to this, which is the actual recommended budget. And you see the use of reserves is zero. And you see that the operating revenue is now about $104.5 million, or slightly about $7 million less than what we had projected. And then when you add the use of reserves at 2.5, you're really up to about $10 million difference between the 114 total sources projected 2010 and the 104.5 that is now in the recommended budget. And that essentially defines the scope of our $10 million problem. The operating budget, you can see, is actually significantly below both the projected amount and the FY 2009 adopted. And you can see that the capital project, thanks to some anticipated capital grant funds, didn't drop as much as we might have expected. Out of that $1.3 million, about $300,000 is expected to come from grant funds and about $1 million from the general fund's current revenue. I do want to point out at the bottom of the slide, I mentioned that in each of those cases, the columns, we have the projected year-end variance included in the revenue amount, which has been our practice of late. $2.5 million basically for 09 and the 010 projected. We have dropped that to $1 million, which essentially reflects the reality that it is unlikely that we will generate any year-end surplus from revenues over budget, and that any year-end surplus we generate will come from expenditures under budget, and therefore we've taken the portion of it that we think conservatively can be attributed to expenditures under budget, $1 million, and have continued to include that in the budget. General fund revenues. We're going to start with an overview, and then we're going to get into a look at some of the individual critical key general fund tax revenues. Overall, as I mentioned, total revenues about 104.5. You can see that taxes represent about 61% of the budget. Interfund charges, a substantial piece. That's the second largest piece after taxes. Those are charges that the general fund levies and reimbursements that we collect from our enterprise funds for services provided. One of the best examples, the easiest I can give you, is the airport fund pays for the firefighting services that are provided by, I think it's Station 12 out at the airport, and they pay all of the costs of 8. I knew it was an even number. And the airport pays for the entire cost of that fire station, including equipment and everything, and that's reflected in the interfund charges. If we look at the taxes specifically, you can see that the top 4 taxes within that piece of the pie, sales tax about $18.5 million, property tax $23.9 million, the bed tax, transient occupancy tax, $12 million, and the utility users tax, $7.2. That is also a fairly substantial change from a number of years ago when sales tax was by far our largest single revenue source, and property tax was not. But because of some of the shenanigans the state has played over the years with the triple flip and the VLF swap and all of that, now property tax is as frankly as traditionally is the case in local government, is our largest single tax revenue. Interfund charges, I already mentioned. In addition to the airport aircraft and rescue and firefighting reimbursement, we are also reimbursed for administrative services provided to the enterprise funds for their pro rata share for things like payroll and accounts payable and the like. Service charges is 9% of the budget, and that's an interesting number to me because it really does show what a small proportion of our revenue source are really within our control in terms of service charges. It's less than $10 million. It's about $9 million, so that even if we were able to double our fee revenue overnight, and even if we could make it stick, which is both of which are unlikely, it still would barely cover the operating deficit that we were looking at having to solve. The year-end variance I already mentioned. We lowered that from about $2.5 million to $1 million, and that would represent only that portion which we believe expenditures will come in under budget. General fund projections, which is essentially defining the problem. Again, if you look at our revenues as budgeted and estimated, and in this case, to get a more pure look at things, I have taken out the year-end variance amounts from all revenue numbers. So for 09 adopted, just short of $107 million. We're expecting to end this year at about $103.7 million, so about $3.2 million under budget on our revenues this year. The 2010 projected, again, that's the number from the multi-year forecast from about a year ago. We were expecting to be at about $109.3 million in 2010. We are now projecting those revenues to be about $103.5 million. So again, about $6 million less than we were projecting. Here's a look by category, and this is these are the categories contained in your budget document in the summary of revenues in the summary section of the document. Again, for the two columns I've given you, which is the 2009 adopted budget and the recommended budget, you see there's the $3.5 million at the bottom, the total decline. When you factor in the additional year-end variance decline of 1.4, you're up to about a $5 million decline, and this is adopted. So this doesn't tie to the $10 million deficit because that was based comparison to the multi-year forecast projection for 2010, not to the adopted. But it does show that year over year, adopted to recommended budget, revenues are down without the year-end variance about $3.5 million, and with the year-end variance about $4.9 million. I'm going to just take one slide to look at the current year revenue. I know the focus is not on FY 2009, but I think in order to understand the revenue projections for next year, we've got to, as we do at staff level, look first to project where we think we're going to end the year this year. Sales tax, the budget this year was $20.4 million. It was based on a 1% assumed growth. Now keep in mind that was, back in the good old days a year ago. when most of this had not hit the fan yet. We thought that that had been a fairly conservative number. We actually exceeded our year-end for estimate for 2008, so we could have afforded to decline 0.3%. This year and still made budget, and we were feeling pretty good about that for a while, but obviously that's not the case. We're now estimating we're going to end the year down 7% on sales tax, or $2 million short of budget. For bed tax TOT, we're projecting we're going to end the year down 4.9%, $1 million under budget. Property tax, again, on a $23 million budget for property tax, pretty much right on the button. We're projecting maybe about $140,000 short, but that's really a nominal amount given it's a $23 million budget. And our utility users tax, we're actually tracking ahead of budget and expect to end the year about $100,000 over budget. So all told, just from these four key revenue sources this year, we're expecting to be under budget by about $3.1 million. I've lumped a number of other revenues together, $600,000. So we're looking at being under budget this year on revenues about $3.7 million.
Madam Mayor?
Yeah. Ms. Falcone?
Quick question. The projection, particularly with the TOT, how current is that? I mean, I know I heard you say that somebody was here into the wee hours. We just got some latest data, not good data. Is that reflected in the numbers that you're presenting us today?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Falcone, yes.
So this is all the current data up to the moment, as best as we know it, in that some of these things do lag. We still have everything as up to the minute as we can?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. If you take the bottom line number and the bottom right-hand corner and you see the total, we're short about $3.7 million this year on these key revenues. You add to that, as we told the council in the January work session, we expect our fees and service charge revenue this year to be under budget by about $1.1 million, the bulk of which is building and safety, planning fees, building permits, and the like. And we expect to be under budget on parking citations, about $390,000. So we're really looking at a shortfall on revenue this year of about $5.2 million. And you will recall that in addition to that, there was about $1.2 million in increased costs this year, so that our shortfall this year with which we are dealing is about $6.4 million. And I know that you're aware of the fact that we have proposed a plan to rebalance the FY09 budget in a strong attempt to be able to end the year without the use of reserves. That includes asking the general fund departments to come in under budget by some $3.5 million. And I will tell you that we'll have a third quarter review to the Finance Committee and to the City Council in April, or early May perhaps. But at this point, it looks like we really have a significantly decent shot at making that, and that speaks to the, I think, the discipline of the departments in tightening their belts and avoiding or deferring expenditures wherever possible. So I can't promise we'll make it, but I think at this point we are definitely on track to make that. Now we'll move to 2010. And we're going to look at just, again, those top 3 or 4 revenues. Again, for sales tax, we are projecting sales tax to go down next year from this year's level, 1.4%. That would mean that the recommended budget is $18,142,000, which is $3.1 million less than the multi-year forecast projected. And keep in mind that the multi-year forecast essentially relied on a long-term growth rate in our revenues of about 4%, which is consistent with 20/30-year experience. Of course, we're not in those normal times right now, but that explains why the gap is, you say, well, you were down 1.4. That's not that big a decline, but you've got to compare that to, what we were looking at was a 4% growth. So it's really about a 5.4% swing. And when you're talking essentially a $19 or $18 million revenue, that's quickly a lot of money. This is a look at our most recent actual sales tax experience, and you see that in fiscal year 2008, we were down for the whole year 2.5%. The last 2 quarters of that fiscal year, we were down 1.3 and then 7.4%. And then the first 2 quarters of this fiscal year, down 0.6%. And I can remember when that number came in and we thought, wow, that's great. But then, of course, the December quarter came in, and I know you're all aware of this. It was down 11.7%. So we are down 6.1% for this fiscal year. And as I mentioned, we're essentially projecting to end the year down 7%. So we can actually still continue to decline more than we have so far this year and on the whole, and still meet our year-end projection for FY09. For FY 2010, I mentioned that we're projecting a 1.4% decline year over year in our sales tax. We've based that, for the first time, frankly, on data provided statewide by the State Department of Finance. This is the quarter-by-quarter projections by the State Department of Finance for sales tax change year over year by quarter. So the 2 quarters this fiscal year that we have not yet gotten, the March and June quarters, they're projecting to be down by 7.4 and 8.7% respectively. And then you can see that their projection is we're going to start the next fiscal year still weak, but slowly bottoming out. And they're actually projecting that by the end of the fiscal year 2010, the 4th quarter of 2010, April, May, and June, that we will return to a positive growth trend. We use these numbers, and we came up with 1.4% down. And the reason that that may not seem logical, given what you see there, down -5, down -2.7, it's because not all the quarters are equal in terms of the amount of money we get. And so, fortunately for us, the September quarter is not a big quarter. And so that 5.1% decline in the September quarter doesn't have the dollar impact that it would if it were in the December or March quarter. Bed tax, TOT, we are estimating to go down next year 2.2%. That will leave us about a $1.8 million short of our previous forecast. Actually, we were projecting a 3% decline, but we've added in, we've added in $100,000 into the TOT revenue estimate as our best guess at this point of the transient occupancy tax that we could collect on vacation rentals when we proceed with doing that business license and vacation rental. And I will admit that we are already beginning the process of trying to identify the range of vacation rentals that are out there. I will acknowledge to anybody that we don't really know what is available out there in terms of revenue. But when you think about it, the general fund portion's 10%. So if it's $100,000, essentially what we're saying is that there's $1 million of retail business out there in vacation rentals per year. It might be more than that, and as we go through the budget process over the next 3 months, really, we may have a better number that we can bring to you and update it as a staff recommended adjustment.
Madam Mayor, one question on that. Would not they owe us back TOT? I mean, which would be a larger one-time. I think that's a conservative estimate, but in realms of possibility for $100,000 for that year's TOT. But if these establishments, if we come up with some number of how much back TOT we would be expecting, something that you figured in as well.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Williams, we've certainly considered that number. It is not in the 100,000. It's not part of that 100,000. The 100,000 to us is sort of the ongoing amount, and to the extent that we can get one-time money from back audits, we will certainly pursue that. And but we didn't budget it because of the unknown. Yes, that's right. I'm sorry. TOT. This is the schedule that you get every month as part of your Revenue News email. And again, you can see that for the year, we're down 4.6%, and we budgeted for a 3.1% increase, so it's really about a 7.7% swing. If there's any silver lining to this cloud at all, you look at the last 2 months and you see they were both down more than 20%, and you think, well, how could we only be down 4.6% for the year? Well, the answer to that question is look up at August, which is our largest month of the year, and we were up 10.5%. The 2 months that we were down 20% or more, February and March combined, don't even approach 75% of the August number. So that was a very fortunate turn of events, and it is that August number that has kept us from being down probably double digits for the whole year, because you can see that since August, we have not been up year over year a single month. So September through March, we are, going down every month, and 4 of those are double digit. A couple of them in the 10-11% range, and then the most recent 2, 20.7 and 24.1. Property tax, we are projecting a 3% growth for next year. We've talked to the assessor's office at the county, and they believe that that is a reasonable number based on the appeals they're seeing, the assessed value changes they're seeing. Fortunately, for us at least, we're not being hit as hard on the property tax reassessments as North County of Santa Barbara or other areas of the state. So we feel like 3% is reasonable based on those discussions with the county and what they're seeing. It still leaves us about $378,000 short of the multi-year forecast, so we had to lower that. Utility users tax, essentially a wash. I would, if I could do it over, probably just zero out that $2,640 on $7.2 million. But the 4 of them together were down about $5.3 million from what we were projecting. There's the $5.3 million you see from the taxes from the previous slide. Add into that the fact that we're having to project a 60% decline in our investment income. And other revenues about $227,000, and then there's the decrease in the year-end variance, which clearly added to the problem. So just from these several things, we're about $7.75 million below the previous projection. When you add in fees and service charges, parking citations, and a number of others, we're looking at about a $10.5 million deficit. And that's another way of coming back to that same number we saw at the macro level several slides ago. Balancing the general fund. As Jim mentioned, I will add, Jim's been at this business somewhat longer than I have, but in 25 years of it, I've never seen an environment like this. Very difficult to project revenues. I used to take immense pride in the accuracy with which our Treasury staff would project our revenues. They would $100 million budget, we'd be within 1% at the end of the year, maybe sometimes 0.5%. I'm not. Our crystal ball isn't that good anymore. It's just difficult. Our goal has been to balance the budget to what we believe to be realistic estimates of ongoing revenue, minimize the use of and the reliance on one-time revenue, and to the extent possible, minimize service impacts within the existing constraints. This is in the budget message, Mr. Armstrong's budget message, which leads off the budget document. And if there was a citizen listening that was interested and you could look at one thing in the budget document, I would certainly recommend that, because I think it's an excellent summary of the problems and the recommended budget and the balancing strategy. We do have some one-time measures in there, the $1.5 million of labor cost reductions, and I'm going to go through these in a little more detail after we get through this summary slide. The capital program reductions of about $800,000, department budget adjustments of $7.4 million, reductions to community organizations of about 8.4% of their allocations. Allocation of costs to enterprise funds of about $461,000, and internal service fund reductions of about 7%. These are the rates and service charges charged to the general fund by those internal service funds I mentioned before: information systems, motor pool, building maintenance, and risk management. We basically imposed upon them a 7% rate reduction on their charges and told them then to go back and rebalance their budgets to their lower revenue estimates as a way to spread the ability, the pain, if you will, of the budget shortfall. That ongoing measures total some $8.6 million, and the total is $10.8 million. You may recall that the previous slide, the scope of the problem was about $10.5 million. So you can see that we've got about an extra $300,000 in here, and we have put that $300,000 in the appropriated reserve in the budget. So there is an appropriated reserve now of about $300,000, which will be available if council wants to consider that as part of the budget balancing through your consideration of the budget. It's not a lot of money, but $300,000 is certainly better than having it balanced right to the dollar. Okay, so let's go through these categories of the balancing strategy. Labor cost reductions, $1.5 million. Would include furloughs, the elimination of vacation cash outs, and the freeze to benefit plans. Managers and supervisors have already accepted those elements, and those savings from managers and supervisors alone total $840,000. And that $840,000 has been factored into the budget already. It's part of that $1.5 million. So we still need about $660,000 worth of labor concessions citywide from the rest of the bargaining units to make the $1.5 million. Obviously, from our standpoint, if the labor concessions can exceed the $1.5 million, then that may very well enable us to go back and consider restoring some of the positions that are targeted in the budget for elimination. And I can assure you, and I know I speak for Jim on this, we would like nothing better than that. Treatment and Patrol Bargaining Unit has agreed to similar concessions, although minimal general fund impact, because they really are, for the most part, the patrol or harbor and airport patrol, and the treatment is the water and wastewater. And we are still in discussions, as you heard earlier today, with SEIU, with the Police Officers Association, and the Firefighters Association. So we still hold out hope that maybe not only could make the $1.5 million, but exceed it and use that money to revisit some of the positions that are slated for elimination. Capital program reductions reduced from $1.9 million to $1.1 million. One of them is, just to point out again, it includes about a 15-month delay in the replacement of the city's financial management system. We were on the path to doing that. In fact, we were prepared to select a vendor, or we were very close to doing so, but due to the financial constraints and, frankly, workload constraints as well, we have included that in this delay. The reduced funding to community organizations is about $222,000 worth of savings. It's I point out that the budget cuts in the previous years did not include the community organization grants. In many cases, they were held harmless from those cuts while general fund departments were taking cuts, and in some cases actually got small CPI increases. Essentially, this is proportional to the departmental reductions. It includes funding to the Conference and Visitors Bureau, the DO, and the Santa Barbara Channels, just as examples. It does not include human services grants, which are in the budget at a flat level, not decline nor increase. Allocate costs to the enterprise funds. It's about $461,000. Specifically in the waterfront, the budget proposes to transfer restroom maintenance from several of the waterfront restrooms and the dolphin fountain maintenance from the General Fund Parks and Recreation to the waterfront. The same with the beach lifeguards, about $147,000, and the 4th of July fireworks, which has up until now been funded by the General Fund's community promotion budget. That's about it's $55,000. The other component of it is the downtown parking fund, the State Street maintenance contract with the downtown organization is about $770,000 or $80,000 a year. We're proposing to transfer $200,000 of that. Sorry, there to $721,000. $200,000 of that to the downtown parking fund. Internal service fund reductions, about $500,000. It's a reduction, as I mentioned, in charges to the general fund of approximately 7%. We annually, the general fund that is, pays these internal service funds about $9.5 million for those services. And as I mentioned, the lower revenue in the internal service funds will be offset with budget cuts of their own. And that's important to mention because there could be impacts from those budget cuts as well. So Okay, and then the bulk of the dollars, $7.4 million in department budget reductions. It's approximately a 9.9% reduction for all non-public safety departments and 4.7% reduction, actually adjustments, for the public safety departments. Really, it was a 2-to-1, and the policy decision that was made at the staff level in the recommended budget is that the non-safety departments would absorb twice proportionately the target adjustments as the public safety department. So that's why you see 4.7 and 9.9. It's a net reduction of some 51.5 positions, full-time equivalents. About 29 of those are vacant, and about 22 of those are currently filled. As Mr. Armstrong mentioned, that's a moving number, the bottom part, because people are retiring, people are taking other jobs. As vacancies open up, whether or not it's a vacancy that is slated for elimination, it may provide a soft landing for another city employee whose job is slated for elimination. So that number is not set in concrete, and it would certainly be my hope that over the next couple months, through the normal course of business, we would see that currently filled number decline, regardless of any policy decisions that the council may make.
Madam Mayor and Mr. Pearson, just a question on that. Those positions, those are all general fund positions, or are any of those in enterprise funds?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, general fund.
Okay. And
is there? Because this is. I stand corrected. One at the airport.
Okay, that's what I wanted to understand. And so there is a little tiny crossover there, but
there is.
Most all of it is.
And I would encourage you, there is a detailed set of schedules in your budget document that list by department, position by position by position.
Oh, that detailed.
I also want to mention, because this number, there are 3 or 4 other positions that are proposed to be eliminated during next fiscal year, where we've been trying to accommodate people's retirement schedules and things like that. So this is effective July 1st, 2009, but there are at least 3 or 4 other positions where we've been working with those employees, and they have said they're going to retire or do something else, and so they would be on top of these.
They would be in the current year, not in next year.
Well, they're not proposed for elimination right on July 1st, but sometime during the next year, their positions proposed for elimination. Like one of our employees has said, I'm going to be retiring on April the 1st. Would you work with me? And so we said, okay, and we figured out a way to make it work, effective April 1st.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Back to the general fund balancing strategy. This is a look at the allocated adjustment amounts by department in the general fund, and you see at the bottom it totals the $7.4 million. And again, on the far right, you see those percentages I previously mentioned, 9.9% for non-safety and 4.7% for safety departments. And these adjustment amounts are based on what I'm referring to here as status quo budget. As I think you may recall from the January work session, it is essentially what the budget would have been for 2010 without adjustments, but we also back out any significant non-controllable expenses. The best example I can think of off the top of my head is that the Community Development Department includes the Human Services grant funding of $500,000. We actually back that out of their budget before we apply the percentages, because that's really a separate item over which the council exercises control, not the department. And to ask them to include that in their cut adjustment, we believe would be a little bit unfair. So we've backed that out. There are a number of those. We provided on the January work session actually a detailed list to the council of what those were. But once we arrive at that status quo budget, then we apply these percentages. And again, there's another piece of this I want to stress, that status quo budget, when we project what we thought like a year ago, the multi-year, when we do these budgets, we adjust their budget to status quo, which includes adjusting them, essentially holding them harmless, considering it baseline, factoring in any and all salary increases that are pursuant to MOU. So if a particular bargaining unit is getting a 3% raise, then essentially we raise that departmental budget by that 3% for their salary and benefit costs for that, whatever those dollars are, add it to their budget, and then that's considered their status quo because they don't negotiate their own labor agreements, and so we essentially consider that baseline. And that does have an impact on certain departments more than others. I'm going to go through now, at the risk of doing what I said I wasn't going to do, which is getting into a little bit of detail, because I think it's important to give you just sort of a quick overview of some of the proposals in the department budgets. I don't know all of the details of every department budget. I could know some of them, but not all of them. But we're going to go over some, and then, of course, you'll get the full details as the departments come before you with their budget presentations. We're going to start with some looks at some revenue increases that are contained in the recommended budget. And in community development, they're proposing to increase building permit fees 8% and land development fees 10%. I will point out that that did not result in them increasing their revenue estimates simply because of the current building environment. But they are raising fees, and then that gets that in place. And if building activity turns around, then I think we would, of course, see some increased revenue. In finance, we are proposing to implement a flat $5 per month late payment fee on our utility bills. That's something that we've never done before. Virtually all utilities that I see when I get my bills, there's a late payment fee. Many times it's 1.5%. We didn't feel that a percent-based fee was reasonable because we tied it to cost. It's a cost-based fee as required by Proposition 218. It's the extra postage, the paper, the materials, and the time it takes for us to chase down delinquent bills. $5. We're expecting that conservatively would generate $100,000 of revenue to the general fund, and it's a utility bill, enterprise fund bill, but it's the finance department, the general fund, that puts the effort into collecting those bills. So it is indeed a general fund revenue. Already mentioned about pursuing TOT and business license revenue on vacation rentals. In the fire department, they're increasing their budgeted mutual aid revenue by $300,000. We feel comfortable doing that based on the experience of the last several years. I did skip that. And I got finance in there twice. Yeah. That's because we're important. Yeah. I'm sorry. I apologize. The police department, increased parking citation fees, $300,000. The imposition or increase of a vehicle release fee, which would generate $275,000, and dog license fee increase, which would generate $25,000. Those are just a sampling.
Sure. Mr.
Pearson, I thought parking citation fees were going under budget this year. So how do we increase revenue next year?
Well, we did just recently raise the
Oh, right. We went through that.
the
Never
fee
mind.
levels.
Thank you. Got it.
Okay, so now those are just a sampling of some of the revenue increases included in the budget. Now I'm going to look at some of the departmental budget adjustments on the other side and go quickly through the departments. Administrative services targets was about $244,000, and administrative services is the city clerk's office, human resources, eliminating 2 vacant positions and reducing citywide training costs. City administrator's office, eliminating 3 positions. The reductions will affect the government access, our TV channel. City attorney's office, about $232,000. 5 full-time positions will be converted to part-time, and 1 hourly position will be eliminated. The community development department target number was $1 million. They will be eliminating 9 positions. That will save about $750,000 and will certainly have an impact on service levels. Finance's number was $470,000. We're proposing to eliminate 2 vacant full-time positions. I mentioned the late fee and the audit revenue. I mentioned the late fee on the utility bills and the enforcement of TOT. One of the other things in our budget that we're proposing is the elimination of the revenue audit programs on TOT, sales tax, and utility tax. Now, we understand better than most the implications of what that means. We also feel that a one and a half year suspension of those revenue audit programs really is something that we can sustain, and it really, frankly, saved us the elimination of another position or even two. Fire, $908,000. I mentioned that of that, $300,000 is coming from increased budgeted mutual aid revenue. They're proposing to eliminate through attrition 5 relief positions and to maintain a vacancy in a fire captain position during the period of the fire chief recruitment. Library is actually, they're looking at about $658,000 of adjustments. $455,000 of that was their assigned target amount, and they had to also adjust to the projected loss of some $200,000 of their revenue. They're proposing to eliminate 8 positions. They're proposing to close both the main branch and the east side branch, the main library and the east side branch on Mondays, and reference and youth services would be impacted. As you all well know, the mayor and council allocation, $84,000, and in case anyone, I know you're well aware of this, it's the exact same proportion number assigned to every single city department. And you are proposing to meet this by reducing by 75% your meeting and travel and intern budgets and reducing your dues and memberships. Parks and Recreation numbers $1.5 million. The budget proposes to eliminate 13 positions and almost 17,000 hours of seasonal staff, saving about $960,000. Further reductions to contracted work, equipment purchases, and supplies. Close the Lower West Side Center. Close the Teen Center on Saturdays, and reduced park and tree maintenance. Police, $1.6 million. Of that, I'm happy to say $1.3 million of it is met by new revenue. $715,000 of that new revenue is to come from the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act, the Stimulus Act, if you will. There are 2 pots of money out there. One is the Justice Assistance Grant, which we've applied to. It's an entitlement grant. We will get it. We'll be using that money to fund 1 sworn position for 2 years. The other is the COPS grant program, Community Ordering and Policing. It's a competitive grant process, so we are not guaranteed that. But we have applied for about $451,000 to fund 4 sworn positions. A couple things about that. The COP funding is a 3-year funding commitment from the federal government, so if we get it, we've got it for 3 years. In the past, COPS funding had required a local match. The Reinvestment and Recovery Act suspended the local match, so we will get 3 years of 100% funding for whatever they award us. We've applied for the grant. Apparently now we're told that we will not have a decision on that grant funding until September. But for the present time, we have put the grant money into our budget, and we have used it to support 4 sworn non-supervisory positions, because the COPS money cannot be used for supervisory positions, only patrol positions, patrol persons, not sergeants or lieutenants or captains. The police budget contains no net reduction of sworn positions if the COP grant is received at the requested level. It does propose eliminating 6 non-sworn positions. 3 would be effective July 1st, and 3 later in the fiscal year upon retirement of the incumbent. It does eliminate school crossing guard support for $112,000, and we are already talking, as I understand it, to the school district about working on a seamless transition to transition that to their responsibility. Public Works, $721,000. It eliminates a full-time project engineer. It does propose transferring 4 positions to other Public Works enterprise or special revenue funds, and it does propose an increase in engineering revenue of $315,000 by assigning 2 engineers to billable work as opposed to doing other work. Contingency adjustments, in addition to the $7.4 million balancing that we've just gone through, excuse me, We also asked departments to identify collectively an additional $1.9 million of contingency adjustments. That could be for any number of reasons, one of which would be if revenues deteriorate more rapidly, although I think that's less likely now between now and budget adoption because, frankly, we don't get any more sales tax numbers until we're basically ready to adopt. But it could also offer the City Council options as you consider the budget over the next 6 to 8 weeks, 10 weeks. It certainly would have further service impacts if we were to need to take any of all of that, because it would include the elimination of an additional 10 full-time equivalent positions. But as I said, it does provide the City Council with options when considering the recommended budget. This is a look at that $1.9 million, and again, it's basically the same formula, so that the public safety departments are just about half of the non-safety departments. General fund expenditures, I'll just give you two quick looks, two different looks at this. This is the recommended 2010 budget compared to the current year amended budget. Current year amended budget. And a couple things I want to note. Administrative services, you see it's only down $667,000. One of the reasons, the primary reason for that is because the election costs are included in the administrative services budget for 2010. You see that some departments, community development, down dramatically. You notice fire is actually up from the amended current year budget to the recommended budget by $376,000. Parks and Rec is down almost $2 million. And you can see police is down about $418,000, but keep in mind that the police department this year received a one-time supplemental appropriation at mid-year for $400,000 to pay for the extraordinary vacation and comp time cash outs upon the retirement of the senior command staff, that when we had, 3 captains, I think, retire and a deputy chief. So really, the amended 09 budget and the 2010 budget are almost the same, but you can see overall down about $7 million. And then the same look, but compared to the 2009 adopted budget. And the numbers are a little different. You see it's about $7 million difference to the amended budget and only about $3.3 million to the adopted budget because of the supplemental appropriations and the carryovers which are included in the amended budget.
Bob?
Okay, Ms. Falcone, please.
Could you go back one slide, please? Just curious. In the fire department, I understand the police cash out, and that is about a wash. That is about what that cash out costs, $400,000. And that's a one-time, upon retirement, folks get to take the money that they've been accruing. But in fire, can that be attributed, the 376 plus, can that be attributed to the mutual aid, the extraordinary mutual aid that we had this year?
Yes, two things. One is, yes, a mutual aid would be one, and the other would be the MOU increases that had been negotiated, a year and a half ago, or whenever we had our most recent MOU with the Firefighters Association. I think those would be the two things. The mutual aid, the mutual aid number would probably account for most of that. Yeah, right. I would think that's right.
Like 300,000. All right, thanks.
Yes. Expenditures, just a quick look at the final pies here. You can see that public safety represents 52% of the budget. That's up about 1% or 2%. I think last time we looked it was about 50%, but 52% and almost $54.7 million. The next largest budget in the general fund is Parks and Recreation at about $14 million. Community development, still, despite the cuts, $10.8 million, third largest in the general fund. Public Works is 7%, about $6.8 million. And the administrative departments combined, that's City Attorney, Administrative Services, City Administrator's Office, Mayor and Council, and Finance, $11.8 million, or about 12% of the budget. Expenditures by object, salary and benefits represent 76% of the budget. That's actually up about 1% after some of the reductions that are in the recommended budget. Allocated costs, I mentioned those before. Those are the charges that the general fund absorbs from our internal service funds. I'm going to look at positions now. Citywide position totals going back to FY 2005. You can see at that point we were at 1,060 full-time equivalents. Got as high as about 1,085 in the current fiscal year, and next year, fiscal year 2010, the proposal is for 1,036 citywide full-time equivalents. This is the general fund positions by department. You can see that in total, the general fund has 618 and a half full-time equivalents. Police with over 200, fire with over 100, and then Parks and Rec, Community Development, Public Works, and so forth. This is a look by department at the position changes that I mentioned before, the 51.45 full-time equivalents. You can see that, as Mr. Armstrong mentioned, sure enough, there it is. The airport is down one position. But there's the amended 09 budget to the recommended 2010, and it's down 51.45. Quick look at the general fund capital program. I mentioned it's $1.3 million. We have East Side Branch Library improvements, Central Library building reorg. Then we have some playground, lower equipment replacement program, Lower Mesa Lane steps, park restroom renovation program, Shoreline Park safety improvements, some records management system improvements. That's in the police department. That is the recently replaced system that they got for the in-car and all of that. And then ADA improvements and sustainability improvements at $150,000 each.
Madam Mayor?
Yes,
Mr. Pearson, could you go back to that one just for a second? Those are the contributions of the general fund towards each of those projects. Am I correct in that understanding, and that the actual amount of each of those projects is probably much larger given the grant funding that these leverage?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, I think for the most part there are two, of those projects which we are projecting to receive grant dollars on.
The rest are 100% funded by the general fund?
Yes, sir.
Really? Oh,
yes.
So I didn't realize that. So
now,
this is the smaller part of our capital program as a whole.
Yes, and I would point out that in some cases there are contributions to related capital projects in other areas of the city that wouldn't show here because they're not funded by the general fund.
Understood.
So,
okay, thank you.
In conclusion, budget challenges. The economic uncertainty, we've mentioned it time again. I won't dwell on it. State budget impacts. We know that Prop 1A, thank goodness for Prop 1A, the state cannot take our money without really going through hoops. But they are finding ways to nickel and dime us, and I'll give you an example. Our vehicle license fee money, which used to be considerable, but then they swapped it for property tax. But the last couple months, funny enough, one of the things they deduct from vehicle license fee revenues before they distribute it to the local governments is their administrative costs. Well, just what a surprise. The administrative costs have gone up so dramatically that actually there was a couple months ago where we got a letter instead of a check. And the letter said, gee, I'm sorry, after deducting all of our administrative costs, there's no money left to distribute to local governments this month. And that's an example.
Just on that, we had several years ago by now, maybe 3 or so, we got IOUs in terms of the VLF, and they were supposed to pay it back within 3 months or some sort of nonsense. Did they ever pay it back?
They did indeed, with interest.
They did indeed.
They
with
did
interest.
indeed.
Oh, isn't that wonderful?
And I mention another thing, since you mentioned borrowing money, is twice now in the last 15 months they have delayed paying us our gas tax money, also referred to as HUT or highway users tax money, where they've sent us a letter saying we're going to keep your highway tax, user tax, gas tax money for a period of 3 or 4 months, and then we will pay you back, later.
At least they're balancing their budget on their money, which is still their money
That's
until they
absolutely
give it
right.
to us, right? Yeah.
Right. State budget impacts, restoration of the budget reserve. I know that we've talked to the Finance Committee. We've begun discussions with the Finance Committee about trying to establish a strategy to restore our budget reserve back to policy levels. Future pension cost increases, the significant investment losses sustained by CalPERS over the last 18 months has not yet impacted our employer contribution rates. And under the rate-setting process employed by PERS, we don't expect that it will affect our contribution rates materially until fiscal year 2012. But unless there is a dramatic increase in the market value of PERS's assets soon, we can expect a significant impact from our pension costs in fiscal year 2012 when these losses distill down to our employer rates. I think it's one of the reasons why it's so important that we balance our budget now so that we don't have a lingering problem when that problem arrives. And then, of course, as was mentioned earlier today at the Finance Committee, the infrastructure funding, which still needs to be addressed. Unfortunately, this is not the fiscal time to be stepping up huge amounts of infrastructure financing, I don't think, but we certainly feel the commitment from the Finance Committee and the Council and the Infrastructure Financing Task Force to address that as soon as we possibly can. So what's next? Day after tomorrow is next, April 23rd, this Thursday, a budget work session and public hearing from 2 to 5 p.m. here in the council chambers. We will be doing department presentations for some of the administrative departments and community development. Then on Monday, May 4th, from 6 to 9 p.m., again, all meetings are here in the council chambers. 6 to 9 p.m. on Monday, May 4th, Library and Parks and Recreation. The following day, Tuesday, May 5th, at the council meeting, the capital program. Wednesday, May 6th, 3 days in a row, 9 a.m. to noon, Public Works. Tuesday, May 26th, from 6 to 9 p.m., Police and Fire. Monday, June 1st, 3 to 6 p.m., Airport, Waterfront, Finance, and the non-departmental. And then beginning on Tuesday, June 2nd, at the regular council meeting, council deliberations with 3 more dates available for council deliberations as needed, June 9th and June 16th, all Tuesdays, all regular council meeting dates. And then Tuesday, June 23rd, budget adoption. These are the Finance Committee schedule that was taken and approved by the council today, the Finance Committee today. They will be looking at general fund revenues in more detail, the reserves and multi-year forecast, the capital improvement plan, general fund fees and service charges, enterprise fund fees and service charges, and staff recommended adjustments, if any. For the citizens, copies of the recommended budget can be obtained on CD-ROM. We have them available already, either in the city clerk's office or the finance department at City Hall. Copies of the budget will be available at both the main and east side library at the reference desks, and of course the budget is available already on the city's website at santabarbaraca.gov. Special thanks to city staff across all departments. As Jim mentioned, this was a heroic undertaking in terms of putting this together in these uncertain times. Departmental budget staff, CAO staff, including, and don't see the name here, but Marcelo Lopez and Nina Johnson. And the budget staff, I want to recognize Michael Pease right here, our budget manager, who arrived to us and was thrown into the deep end about, 4 months ago?
He had a full head of hair, too, then. Pulling it out.
We are very lucky because Michael had a similar position with the city of Glendale before arriving, and so, but literally threw him in the deep end. And is Jonathan here? There he is. Jonathan Abad, our finance analyst for budget. These were some of the guys that were here, as Jim said, at all hours. Jill Tora, our treasury manager. Lynn Sparks, I don't believe is here, but you know Lynn, our finance analyst, and of course Jenny Hopwood, our executive assistant, who did wonders with some of the production. So I want to thank everybody for that, and that concludes my presentation, and thank you very much for your patience.
No, thank you very much. It's amazing that you were able to do this. It's very difficult when we look at the numbers, and they're still sliding, so it's even harder. I just wanted to point out one thing, and then Mr. Horton, as Finance Chairman, wants to say something, too. I noticed the Finance Committee budget review schedule. It looks very good. It has lots of detail, and that's what the Finance Committee gets to do. But as you give this budget to us, to all 7 of us, I think it's important that all 7 of us are the ones that are going to be looking at it, as you indicated. We're going to be looking at it department by department and giving some direction and asking lots of questions. But it's going to be the 7 of us that are doing any policy questions. I just want to, I think the Finance Committee does a great job. They work hard, and I just wanted to kind of separate that a little bit, because all 7 of us now are really the big Budget Finance Committee, and that's what we're going to be doing over the next couple months. So thank you. Mr. Horton.
I wanted to also join with what Bob said about the finance staff. It may not seem like we appreciate it, but we do. And Michael, I used to have your job at another place, and I know what this is like. And I have nothing but empathy for you and your staff. This is it's an award-winning effort, as we know, because we've received a lot of awards for what we do here. So not only is it on time and like we want to see it, but it's a very high-quality product, and we know that, and we appreciate what you do. I just wanted to kind of say one thing at this point in this process. I've been doing this stuff between 30 and 40 years, and there's never been a time when things are as unclear. And so we do the very best we can with a document like this, but the very foundations of what we base all this work on are no longer stable. And we wake up, we look at the LA Times or the New York Times or whatever, the Wall Street Journal, and you see, yes, indeed, there are some optimistic signs out there. And then you turn the next page, and there's as many or more that are on the downside. So for the public that are watching, we are pledged to do the best job we can. However, none of us really know where this thing is heading in the next quarter, the next 6 months, or the next year. But we will work hard to bring forth a budget that we're all going to be proud of. I think there's going to be suffering throughout, but we are, all of us up here, committed to maintaining public service, and that's what we intend to do. And once again, thank you for your work.
Thank you very much. We have I have about 7 people who want to speak to items. Does anybody have any questions beforehand?
I can wait until after the speakers.
Okay, good. Well, let's hear Peggy Langle, followed by Jackie Derbyshire. Let's see, that's on.
Is the microphone on? Yes, thank you. Jackie Derbyshire had to leave, so she will not be able to speak. My name is Peggy Langle. I'm the Executive Director at the Santa Barbara Humane Society. Some of you I have met personally, and some of you I have known professionally by watching these City Council hearings. On a personal note, prior to my tenure of joining the Santa Barbara Humane Society, I was an executive director at the Public Health Department, and they're in government service for 24 years. So talking about sharing the pain, I certainly feel the challenges that you're facing yourselves here as City Council members. With this in mind, I wanted to take you back through the pages of history of animal welfare as it speaks to some of the issues related to the City of Santa Barbara, specifically about the proposed budget cuts for our city animal control agency. And I know we're not getting into details now, but I wanted to present some thoughts for you to consider as you go through the deliberation process, and we will be back again for more specific discussion during the police department presentation and their budget elimination. It's somewhat interesting and a little ironic to note that actually this month, 122 years ago, the Santa Barbara Humane Society Board of Directors received approval from the State Attorney General's Office for articles of incorporation. Incorporating in 1887, the Santa Barbara Humane Society is the 3rd oldest private nonprofit humane society in the state of California, and the only humane society in the state of California that had continuous operation since 1887 to the present date, and where we are currently located on Overpass Road. The foresight of these individuals in the 1880s is absolutely astounding. If I showed you our articles of incorporation, you would recognize the majority of these names. There were 11 residents from the city of Santa Barbara who persevered, had the dedication, the willingness, and the temperament to deal with the future of Santa Barbara City Council residents at a time when we didn't even have a rail line coming through Santa Barbara County. After conducting some research, I was kind of curious what the impacts would be in the budget cuts that are being proposed for city animal control staff. And in looking at just the stats for 2008, they received 3,600 calls for service. They investigated 175 animals involved in bite incidents. 2,500 animals were impounded live, injured, or dead. 900 violations were cited. 50 animals were quarantined. And we work extremely close with City Animal Control in investigations, in providing free vouchers for spay and neuter, in conducting any kind of expert testimony, and serving as their hearing officers. How do they do this? They do this through patrols. They do it through education, monitoring. They do it through enforcement. But maintaining an intact animal control program, with the needed staffing and financial resources is not just about when it fits the budget. It is even more important when the fiscal times are bad. The economic crisis that you yourselves as city council members are the same financial crises that your Santa Barbara City residents are facing. City Animal Control and the Santa Barbara Humane Society and Santa Barbara County Animal Services has seen a defined increase in the number of abandoned animals, individuals who are owners not being able to provide them with the required veterinary care. Since January, the Santa Barbara Humane Society, me specifically as the executive director, has received requests for $27,500 in assistance, financial assistance for veterinary costs. Now is the time that we're seeing the abandonment. Now is the time that my humane officer, along with your city animal control officers, are seeing an increase in unspayed litters and unaltered animals that are unvaccinated. We have distemper parvo in this county. We have rabies that is endemic in this county. What does that mean? Licenses are required. I just want to say, please, before you fully consider the proposal for cuts to city animal control staff, think about the pages of history. Don't turn them back. What we have done and what our predecessors have done basically have served today to protect and serve the constituents of this city. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for coming. And Jackie Derbyshire is Santa Barbara Wildlife Care Network, and I'm sure she would echo a lot of what you were saying.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Lee Heller next for Dog Pack, and then Dr. Greg McDonald. Is Dr. McDonald still here? So is Dr. McDonald still here?
No, he couldn't stay.
Okay, then Elaine Martin will be next.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, it may seem odd that Dog Pack members would be here to speak on behalf of animal control. Fewer officers means fewer tickets for having your dog off leash, right?
Right.
But the fact is, dog owners and city residents in general rely on animal control to protect us from dangerous and stray dogs, intrusive wildlife, and the other public safety hazards that animals often create. With respect to Mr. Armstrong's advice to see specific recommendations in the larger context, let me give you a larger context for why animal control can and should not be cut as per current recommendations. First of all, animal control was already cut by 25% about 5 years ago. An additional cut of one full-time officer would further reduce the department from 3 officers to 2, a 33% reduction in service. Second, and with respect to Peggy, these are updated numbers, Animal Control received over 4,000 service calls in 2008. There's just no way the 2 officers can meet that demand. Even if they stop responding to less urgent complaints like leash violations and strays, they'd still have to answer nearly 3,500 calls. I just don't see 2 officers able to do that. With only 2 officers, Animal Control would not be able to provide 24/7 service. After-hours calls would either have to go unanswered or be responded to by a police officer untrained in animal control. Either option is unacceptable. Can we really have no one responding to dog attacks or wildlife-threatening residents? If a police officer responds, how is he or she going to deal safely with either scenario with no training in animal handling? The city needs to get serious about union negotiations along the lines of comments made earlier today by SEIU negotiators. Please instruct staff to work out a compromise that saves money and protects vital services like animal control. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Martin will be followed by Timothy Collins.
Good afternoon, Mayor Bloom, members of the council, or maybe good evening. My name is Eliane Martin. I am the vice president of ASAP, the Animal Shelter Assistance Program. As you all know, or a lot of you know, it's a volunteer organization which helps at the Goleta shelter to take care of stray cats that have been left homeless for one reason or the other. So I'm very aware of the importance of the City Animal Control Department to the well-being of the citizen as well as the welfare of the animals. I am here today to ask you not to accept the recommendation that one animal control officer be cut from the department. As Dr. Heller already mentioned, there's only 3 officers. One was already in position, was already eliminated 5 years ago, I think. And, you know, it's amazing still with only 3 officers, if you think about the size of Santa Barbara, that they manage to answer over 4,000 calls a day. And I've seen, you know, the good work that they can do, and as well as the dedication of those officers. But they're already understaffed as it is. And another 33% cut is just too much to ask from such a small organization. In these tough economic times, more animals are finding their way into the streets as people lose their jobs or their homes. These animals are left to fend for themselves, are subject to disease, abuse, etc. Some of the animals roaming the streets are also considered vicious dogs that represent a danger to the population at large. I do realize that cuts have to be made somewhere, but this is not a cut which will save the city any money. If there isn't any animal control officer available for many calls, a police officer will have to go, a person who is probably not trained in handling animals and therefore may make the situation worse. So not only will someone have to be on staff, but it could end up costing the city much more than an officer's salary if you consider the consequences of the liability if the person responding isn't properly trained to handle the situation. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Is Timothy Collins here? Oh, no. It says here, don't lay off animal control officer. Go ahead.
That's right.
Yeah.
I can speak in a deeper voice. Is it possible that I could read his letter into the record?
Sure.
Okay. He had to leave for class. Dear Mayor Blum and members of the City Council, good day. My name is Tim Collins. I live in the Santa Barbara area. During these times of tough decisions, I do not envy you your position. The decision coming before you as to where to look to save the city of Santa Barbara expenses is why I'm writing, in particular, the proposed city animal control personnel layoffs. If you look back over the last 5 years, you will notice the reduction in city animal control staff already made during that time. To repeatedly cut the numbers in their department and expect the remaining staff to perform the same level of service they consistently provide the city is not reasonable. The city animal control personnel continually train and often do so on their own time. When they are called to respond, they have the skill and knowledge requisite to handle the job professionally. I know people see animal control officers as sometimes as only dog catchers and assume it is a low-skill position. Most people have a minimal understanding of the skill and knowledge required to perform their job effectively. I personally have contact with officers from various animal control agencies up and down the Pacific Coast, and I will say without reservation that the officers of Santa Barbara City Animal Control are second to none. They are extraordinarily knowledgeable, have excellent judgment, and are needed in our city. They deserve the respect they have earned. Look harder and deeper for ways to save our community money. Do not reward the animal control officers' dedication to their work and the education and skills they have required, much on their own time, without pay, with a layoff. Sincerely, Timothy Collins.
Thank you for doing that. We have the police and fire department will be on Tuesday evening on May 26th from 6 to 9 for those of you who are interested in that. Okay, it's to the council. Ms. Schneider, did you have something? And then Mr. Williams.
Thank you. I think this is the most important thing this council does each and every year, and it affects everything else the city does and how it reflects upon our community. So the next several months is going to be extremely difficult, but yet necessary, and I look forward to it in the sense of trying to grapple with things that we've been talking about a lot in the last several months, but now really need to get to the bottom of and make some decisions. Mr. Armstrong, I want to thank you for the tone that you set at the beginning, and especially talking about the tough decisions with positions, and that we're talking about people and their families and lives who are also our residents, many of them in this city or in this region. And I hope that as we move forward with this process, it'll get passionate. There'll be debates. A lot of it, we're already getting flooded emails, which is absolutely appropriate, and I look forward to those. But that we keep the tone professional, that we keep things related to the facts, that if there are questions of why certain budgets look like they're paying for others, and to really get down to what each fund pays for and what it doesn't pay for, because it can be confusing. This is a huge document, and the general fund is only one part of it, although that's the biggest part with a lot of the concerns involved. What I hope to do in the next several months, for those listening, I know people are looking at this budget very carefully, is I want to hear the public hearings. I will read every email and listen to every phone call that comes in. I will be hesitant to automatically say yes or no to things until I get the full picture. But the things that will go through my mind are trying again to stay to the facts, to look at what are the costs of actually cutting certain positions. Some was mentioned in one particular scenario today. Those are questions of mine I will go through. And also considering what cuts in other public agencies, what they're going through in terms of how that will affect city services, as opposed to dealing with social services, mental health, public health, the school districts. That too affects us, although we don't have control over those budgets, but the impacts of those budgets will concern us as well. Just hearing there's pain all around, and the ones I didn't know until hearing details today, including closing the library on Mondays, a couple of them, closing the Lower West Side Center, city TV issues, cuts, the animal control, certainly we've heard about before. So those are certain ones that come to mind just because we heard about it today. And I do appreciate the bargaining units who have chosen to come to the table and look to this, because they are a part of this too, and I think they appreciate and honor and respect that they are part of the solution. And I hope everyone does come to the table and we can get to a resolution in time to pass a balanced budget. So I appreciate the start of this. I look forward to the next several months, and want to hear from folks, and I know we will. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Williams? Mr. Howe?
I would argue that not only is this our most important thing that we're doing all year, I would say that this budget in particular, because of the challenges that we're facing as a city, is probably the most important thing I've done in my life. This is a huge responsibility, and I think that we are going to have to really delve deeply into it, because it will set a precedent for where we go from here. And I agree with the speakers that there's some positions that we should not be eliminating, but I'm going to try to set precedent in dealing with staff on this issue to not be talking about what we shouldn't cut, but if we don't want things to be cut, instead talk about how we're going to get the money so that we don't have to cut it. And so I want my comments to be focused on that. I think that we could do, I think that, first of all, I have to congratulate staff on giving us a baseline that is balanced. The budget isn't fixed. This is not what I would describe a fixed budget. It's balanced, though, and that's a good place to start. So then we can start looking at the different variables and perhaps get something that's closer to what I would describe as fixed. And what I would describe as fixed is something that's balanced in revenues and cuts, and something that minimizes the loss, really, of the productivity and the services that the city provides that people need and desire in the city. To, quote, fix it, I think that we need to delve a little bit deeper into some areas that could provide some of that needed money. One is I would like to know for the next hearing when Public Works comes in particular, whether we really need as much vehicle replacement as we are looking at in motor pool. Personally, I believe that there's a win-win in doing less vehicle replacement at this time. We continue to need the services of the employees involved, and we save the massive costs that acquiring new vehicles entails. There's also leasing often now can also be, in at least with hybrids, can be cheaper than purchasing for government bodies increasingly. And so I really would like to look at that and know exactly how many vehicles we're planning on replacing and minimize that in any way. I know that it's important for the image of this city for us to be converting our fleet, and I believe in converting our fleet and having more hybrids and more alternative fuel vehicles. But holding off on a couple years on the non-emergency vehicles for replacement, I think is okay. And I also think that's also more fundamentally green, even if some of our vehicles are not what we would call green vehicles, because not having a new vehicle sometimes is more green than having a green new vehicle. The other, I would say, that really cries out to me is the DO contract with downtown parking and with the general fund. Am I correct in what I saw that right now the general fund pays $700,000 and we're going to transfer $200,000 of that cost to downtown parking? I do not think that is enough. I think that there is a clear nexus between downtown parking and the DO contract. I think that downtown being beautiful is really, really important, but I think that the nexus is really clear between downtown parking and I don't mind as a general fund to share that cost, but not on a 5/7, 2/7 basis. To me, minimum 50-50. And while that would not be possible right now with the downtown parking's budget, from what I could see, it may be possible after we reach agreements on wage concessions and furloughs, because that would also improve the situation with the downtown parking. And I guess that gets to my final point, is that the wage concessions is really where the hinge point. And that means everybody needs to pitch in, and even when these are non-general fund expenditures, they can improve the situation, i.e., like the example I just gave you, where because we may have concessions with employees that are involved in downtown parking, may enable us to fix something that should not have been a general fund expenditure a long time ago, or would prevent there from being undue hardship because of the transfer, such as we've been getting a lot of emails about slip fees. If there is wage concessions, the impact to the waterfront would be minimized because of those concessions. So we really need, I think, we need staff to move forward with agreement with SEIU to create, and with fire and with police, to create those concessions that make sense to save these positions. But I also think that we need, because the hard part for staff is there's so many variables that if we start saying, no, this is a sacred cow, you can't touch this, this is a sacred cow, you can't touch this, then all of a sudden their job gets a lot harder. And then they can't make any guarantees to the labor groups that will minimize or not have layoffs in exchange for the concessions. So I guess I'm saying you guys need to work harder, but we need to give you the tools to do that, which is to say that we are going to not be naming off this sacred cow, this sacred cow, this sacred cow, because otherwise you won't be able to create an agreement that is really the hinge point of how we can balance this budget and move forward.
Thank you, Mr. House.
Thank you. And I just really want to appreciate the staff that has been working on this and seeing the lights on late at night over the past couple of weeks and knowing how much you've really put yourselves into putting this together so that we can work on it constructively and to really engage with this in a positive and forward-looking way. And it's very well organized, first of all, to start, and for the public to get a chance to get this and look at it and work with it with us is really, it's accessible, it's available, and we have a fairly condensed period of time in which to do the rest of this work. But we've got it well organized even yet for people to have a particular interest in one department or another to be able to come in and give us their suggestions and input. And so I think maybe the most important thing that for me I feel that is my job, our job, is to be really good listeners during this part of the process, to really be taking in the information that each of the department heads have given us and their staffs, to be able to take the real wisdom that we get from people who are closest to the ground in terms of the service delivery, including those who are the recipients and beneficiaries of the services the city provides, people that are delivering those services. They can see things that you may not be able to see from even supervisory positions. So I'm very eager to, as we already have gotten some really good suggestions from those who are at that level in the organization, and certainly from the public at large. One thing that I believe that we're all seeing that seems distinct, at least from, I guess, my mental caricature of what the last 10, 20, 30 years have been. Of course, there's been ups and downs, but this is an incredibly dynamic time. I mean, things seem to be just changing so dramatically and happening in such a way that any predictions, I mean, you could, the one thing you can say about that prediction is it's not going to turn out like that. And so it seems like what we're working on is a work in progress, and even once it's adopted, it's going to be a work in progress for the whole rest of this next year and the year after that, and however long it takes for things to stabilize back out again, if they do at all. So I think that's actually, there's a little word of caution in that. Whatever we really finally settle on, maybe what we need to be building into it is a kind of resilience or dynamic nature to it. So we're planning for the fact that things will be changing, and we build expectations around that, and that we, as we craft our policies, our fiscal policies, that we think light on our feet instead of, solid and dug in. And so those are things I'm very interested in. Creativity and innovation, big watchwords for me. And one of the things I think we've learned from watching corporate America fall flat on its face in some situations has been that rigidity does not work. Operating in silos within an organization just does not work. Having a sense of interconnectedness and cooperation, that kind of dynamism within an organization is critical. And so it's going to be hard because each of us has an interest area. Each of us has got a particular nook or cranny, and those interests are going to feel threatened. And so I guess first I want to just acknowledge and appreciate the staff for having gotten together and collaborated with one another during this part of the process to get us to just today. And that we're going to need that more than ever as we move forward. One thing that I do want to appreciate is that the city's corporate culture has been one of efficiency and we use the word sustainability kind of in an environmental tone, but it actually is woven into the way we see ourselves operating in the city government in Santa Barbara. And it goes beyond just, the green side of it. It goes all the way down to resource efficiency in terms of using tax dollars as wisely as possible. And I think that that is going to stand us in really good stead. It's part of the way our staffs operate, and we here at City Council as well. So let's take the long view. Let's try to look for the day when things stabilize. But in the process, let's just really get some sort of a collaborative spirit going. And I hope the public will join us in that. There may be opportunities, quite honestly, in a spirit of volunteerism where the departments can find opportunities for the public to pick up some of the slack where we don't have paid staff positions, but we have opportunities for people to participate and help generate some of those services that we may leave behind if we only relied on paid staff to do it. There's new ways to do some of these things. So let's keep a little bit of optimism going as we move forward, okay? And I think we will get through this. But thanks for getting us to this point, department heads. Thank you very much for cooperating and getting us this to start working with.
Ms. Falcone?
Thank you. I'm going to reserve my specific comments for once I get into the document and able to make more specific comments about things. There is no doubt that there definitely will be pain. There will be pain all around. But I think it's really important that we all recognize that we should not be penny wise and pound foolish, that we shouldn't cut off our nose to spite our faces, in that some cuts in some departments, in some ways, will inure to the detriment to the whole down the road. I think it's absolutely critical that we do look at the whole and what is best for the whole going forward. In order to do that, we may set policy and direction, but really I think what true leadership is looking and learning and hearing from the community what the priorities are. I'll do what you want in terms of where your priorities lie. And you have to tell us what those are. You have to show up at budget meetings, as some have begun to do. This room is more full today than it has been on many years past, and I think that's because of the extreme nature of the crisis that we're in, which there's always a silver lining to things. And I think getting the community more involved and being able to have people have an honest conversation about where their priorities truly lie and what they can live without for a few years is a critical, not just exercise, I think it's critical for the community going forward into the new era, into the future. So, as far as the bargaining unit concessions are concerned, I think that what might go a long way is to have some sort of an understanding that any money that is saved through a bargaining unit concession actually inure to the benefit of the bargaining unit department that it's coming from. That might get a lot more movement. In the general unit, it's a little more difficult, but I think that concept is still achievable. And I think that if people are looking toward saving something in their particular interest area, although arguably we should all be concerned about the whole because it is all intricately woven and there shouldn't be silos and one shouldn't operate in that way. But I think that that's something that could be looked at in terms of the negotiating team making some discussion toward that. Some departments or some areas of some departments need complete overhauls. They just historically have worked in a particular way and going into the future are going to have to operate differently. An example that I have, and I've been saying for years, so it doesn't come as any surprise to Nancy or anybody else, is that I think the way we provide recreation on the South Coast has outlived its particular structure and needs to be overhauled. Now, how we get regional cooperation throughout the multi-jurisdictions is a very, very, very tall order. But I think that going forward, whether it saves a great deal of money or not, is almost not the point. The point is that it is outlived its structure. a lot of the public works, as was mentioned briefly before, have outlived their sort of structural siloed kind of operations, and maybe something needs to be looked at, stand back and look at it organizationally. I know Mr. Armstrong has done a lot of that and has really been, quite creative and brilliant in being able to put things together for efficiency purposes or for communication purposes, but I think that there's more work to be done in that area. I'm going to reserve any other comments that I have for later down the road. These are just some general concepts. And as far as the wording on the recommendation, A starts with the word accept. Now, I know accept has several various meanings, but I don't want to have that argument down the road on any level. So I would like to replace the word accept the fiscal year 2010 with the word receive the fiscal year 2010, and then hear the report we've done and approve the public schedule we can do. But I would like to change accept to receive, and if you need a motion, Madam Mayor, I'd be happy to make it.
Ms. Falcone, if you look at the staff report, it says receive. So I know the agenda says to accept it, but
the agenda that we have has...
the question is, which one do you want to make a motion from, which is fine.
Well, I just want it to be clear, and if there's ambiguity, then changing it on this as well as
No, can you make a motion, please?
Pardon me?
I'm waiting for you to make a motion. That's what I asked.
I'll make a motion to receive the fiscal year 2010 recommended operating capital budget.
Thank you.
To hear a report, which we have done, and to approve the proposed hearing schedules.
I'll second that.
As it says on our staff report. Thank you very much. Okay. Any other discussion or anything else? I'm going to be looking forward to I'm going to look at all this. We're going to be studying it over the next couple of weeks, and I'm going to be looking forward to hearing the ideas of the council members. If you have an idea to change things, which it sounds like Ms. Falcone has, I'm going to be looking forward to looking at her proposal and seeing what we can do. Thank you. So, anybody else? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Very good. Thank you very much. Item number 13, we've got Bill Collier, who's been sitting here forever and ever.
Item number 13, report on the vacant storefront art program.
I think he deserves a prize of some kind. I don't have anything.
I think we should clap for Bill and Jenny for sticking us through all that.
No, I know that was, and to tell you the truth, I don't expect a lot of people to come to our budget hearings. They usually don't, and we only had about 6 people here, actually, outside of our council meeting. I know there will be some, and that's okay. No, I'm fine with gazillions coming, but I'm just saying, I don't really expect too many if we're doing a good job up here doing what we need to do, because that's why people elect us, hopefully. Okay, Mr. Bossy, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and agency board members. My name is Brian Bossy, and I'm the Housing and Redevelopment Manager with the City of Santa Barbara. The item before you today is a status report on a pilot program aimed at improving the downtown core, and it was initiated through a collaborative effort of agency staff, the County Arts Commission, and the downtown organization. As you are well aware, the current economic downturn has had many impacts in many places, and our community is no different. I think you just heard a presentation that really brought that into focus. Earlier this year, Mayor Bloom held a meeting with a number of local business leaders to discuss the economic impacts that were taking place within our community. One concern that was expressed over and over in that particular meeting was the increase in vacant storefronts along State Street and the potential of those vacant storefronts to then lead to the onset of additional blighting conditions, which would then have an impact on economic activity in our downtown core, which obviously is very important to us all. One idea that did surface at those meetings to address this issue was to use these highly visible storefronts as gallery space for public art installations. And by doing that, thereby enhance the attractiveness of those particular vacant storefronts, draw additional foot traffic to the area, and hopefully additional economic activity, as well as bring additional culture, downtown, and possibly, in an ideal situation, capture the attention of potential lessees for those particular spaces. As a result, agency staff, along with board members Horton and board member House, facilitated a number of meetings with the County Arts Commission, the Downtown Organization, and commercial property representatives. And through that process have developed a pilot program that we're going to discuss with you today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeanette Cando, our redevelopment specialist, who has been leading the charge on our end. And she's going to review the program with you. And upon her report, we're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, Ms. Cando.
Okay, thank you. Madam Mayor, council members, I just wanted to, again, acknowledge Bill Collier and Jenny Brush. They really have been partners in this effort, and I do appreciate their time here today, as well as a lot of effort pulling this program together. What we're moving forward with, the program will be managed by the Santa Barbara County Arts Commission with support by the Downtown Organization as well as the Redevelopment Agency. And really the collaborative nature of this project is what has enabled us to turn it around in such a relatively short period of time. What we're moving forward with is, as Mr. Bossi said, a pilot program of what I'm referring to as low capital art exhibitions in vacant storefronts. And what I mean by that is poster-sized displays that can be easily put up and moved should the gallery space become leased, which would be great. Then it can be removed and then placed in another vacant storefront. And so it really is a moving exhibition that it will be occurring. And it will involve up to 12 displays at any one time. Our first series, which will be curated by Mr. David Starkey, the recently appointed City Poet Laureate, was presented at the Arts Advisory meeting on April 16th and approved. And it really highlights local poets in the area. It will include selected work from the current and former poet laureates, as well as other significant contributors from the local community. And then with that, on each display, each poem will have images associated with it that relate to the theme or the content of the poetry. And that will include illustrations by Rafael Perea de la Cabada, as well as T-Fire images by Nell Campbell. So we can look forward to both displays of text and imagery. So in the process of developing this program, there was definitely a lot of conversations that occurred and some networking, and I've explained what this first series will involve. Additionally, we've had a lot of interest from different organizations around town, including, I mentioned, the poetry community, UCSB Art Studio Department, University Art Museum Contemporary Art Forum, Santa Barbara Museum of Art Teen for Teens program, the Santa Barbara Visual Arts Alliance, Art from Scrap, Rumble Art Group, Santa Barbara Natural History Museum, as well as Mountain Funding. So this is sort of an initial list of groups and organizations that have contacted us and that are interested in being part of this program. So not only are we initiating what we feel will be a really positive impact in the city's downtown core, but we will also be acting as a reserve for future resources for should public art, should this become something that continues, because again, this is just a pilot program. So from here, we will be having a launch for the program on May 7th in association with the upcoming First Thursday. And then this also dovetails with April's National Poetry Month celebration. And again, as we mentioned, the recent installation of Mr. Starkey as the city's new poet laureate. The program, the entire program will run from May through October of this year. There will be two series. The first that I just mentioned will be from May through August. The second from August through October. We have confirmed galleries for the first installation on the 1200, 800, and 500 blocks of State Street. And then, as I mentioned, we're currently having very productive conversations with the property owner at 35 and 36 State Street, and we are anticipating that those locations will also be incorporated into the program as part of this first series. And after that, after we get it launched, we are already putting effort into selecting the curator for the second series, and that will also be coming forward to the Arts Advisory for review and approval and launching on first Thursday in August. So, thank you very much.
Wow, a lot of work is done between the time we had that breakfast and people just said, let's put something in the storefront window. So that's very wonderful. Thank you so much for all that work. Mr. House, did you have something? And Mr.
Actually,
Horton,
I do have some comments and some things to say, but I do want to give Jenny and Bill a chance to speak because they have been so integral and so important to the work that we've been doing, along with Jennifer Rose, also from the downtown organization. And so just to set that off, I want to say what a collaborative, very positive experience. And to see this list of organizations, institutions and art and university and Contemporary Arts Forum and go down the list, it's just really exciting that they want to participate. And certainly one thing of all, the property owners and the property managers that have been willing to, they see an opportunity here. And I do want to report to the RDA board that there was a moment of, for me it was almost terror because we'd gotten so far along in this process and in terms of setting up the groundwork and beginning to frame this at a committee level. But it was just such a shock to hear that out of the 20 plus locations that we had identified, and this is just what, about 2 weeks, a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, that somewhere around 13 to 15 of them had already been leased.
Oh.
What a terrible problem that we
That's very good.
And of course others begin to open up, and so opportunities are there. So this is once again I think a dynamic opportunity. But really I would invite Jenny and Bill to take just a moment and just share from your perspective what you see as possible here. I think the public is really going to enjoy this. And Jenny, if you would just describe maybe the size of the kind of posters and what we're expecting to see in the storefront windows and how that might work, even down to the point of the MOU or the little agreement that we'll have with each of the properties. I think that's getting it down to where it just makes sense and it's something that someone can participate in. So anyway, thank you very much, Jenny, for your work.
Thank you. I just want to say a couple things. I think that this collaboration, while it seems like really amazing, it's really been building, I would say, over the last several years as we've continued to work on developing the Cultural Arts District. Certainly programs like First Thursday have made this possible. I think it's the synergy of these kinds of programs that suddenly we have something in place, that people have a vision for the kinds of activities and the number of people that we have downtown is easily. I think that makes it easier in making a case with the merchants in terms of the visibility. So I think that this partnership is really great. And I think it also makes it easier when we go out to the community. So this is definitely, as Jeanette mentioned, it's going to be a nomadic kind of thing. Well, it's and so we've addressed it that way. The way we're trying to keep it focused on what it is we have a logo that we've developed. We've identified this as the storefront gallery. So I think there's the storefront project, I think we're calling it. So I think people get an idea. I think that will define that as nomadic. But when they see this mark or this brand, they'll know, oh, that's related to that. And we're doing this, as Jeanette had mentioned, in a very low overhead, and we can have the ability to remove things when we need to, when things get leased, and pop up in another location. So we're using those kinds of materials where there's not a lot of infrastructure, but we're really putting our energy into branding the program and identifying it in that way. So we'll start getting some press releases out, and I know already our phone at the commission is starting to ring, hey, how can I be part of that storefront gallery? So again, this would not be possible without the support of the redevelopment agency from our point, and certainly it would not be possible for us as the Arts Commission to go directly to these merchants. So it's this collaborative effort and everybody putting their expertise and their connections in that make it work. So. And
when the public sees the logo that has come forward, I think Jennifer Rose was working on that along with an artist to put that together. Really, really beautiful. And also while you're there, I just want to say, having Mr. Horton at the meetings, very actively engaged and interested in seeing how this thing works out, and may have some comments as well. But thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Horton?
Well, it's not every day you design a program that you hope isn't needed.
That's right.
But actually, I think this has gone so well, and it looks like it has such great possibilities here, that I hope we can take it beyond this. And there was some talk at one of our last meetings of even finding a space downtown in a building that, for whatever reason, may be vacant longer, and trying to make this thing work and continue. And it doesn't mean that we have to have a whole lot of vacant storefronts, but we've done so much work, and there's been so much good cooperation and interagency cooperation on this, that even if we don't have 20 or 30 vacancies in the windows, I hope that we can still make it go, and I'm happy to help work on that.
Great. Thank you for your work already. Mr. Collier, do you have anything? Okay. He's in charge of the downtown organization, but he seems to be going along with this one. This is good. Thanks. So anybody else? Ms. Falcone.
Well, I think this is just a terrific idea, and I'm very happy to. When I heard about this whole thing, the first thing that popped into my mind was, well, that's a brilliant idea to show history and to show, and I know you're having a lot more than just historical photographs and various things, that it's actually going to be, it's going to have themes and curators and underwriters and things like that. But one of the things that popped into my head, in that we have this continual sort of problem at the waterfront in terms of a project not being able to get itself off the ground yet, and it's coming along, I hope, but there's been a lot of work lately about doing beautification down there, new fences, some trees, some painting, and so forth. And I thought, well, why not have this project go down to the Entrada project? And that's why I know a lot of people are a little stunned about hearing Mountain Funding being one of the folks involved in this, but it really is in order to kill 2 or 3 different birds with one stone. It's a beautification of an area that needs beautification at the moment. It also will help to educate the thousands and thousands of people that frequent the waterfront and go past the California Hotel. It will also help to draw people up to the shopping district in the area that was the very first focus of this particular project. So I think it adds to the collaborative, and I'm very happy to see that that this idea was incorporated into this project. I think the synergistic effect will be very, very helpful. So that's where Mountain Funding comes from.
Oh, it's very good. Thank you. So this is just to receive a report. Did you want us to? Okay, we've got it. Anybody else? Thank you so much. It's truly amazing when that little gem of an idea was, everybody is ready for it. So thank you so much. I look forward to seeing these. Thank you. As Mr. Horton says, we hope we don't have to use them. Wouldn't that be funny? Okay, thank you very much. Item number, maybe you can read all the, there's 4 closed sessions.
Item number 14, conference with real property negotiator, and item numbers 15, 16, and 17, conference with legal counsel pending litigation.
Okay, and what we will do is adjourn out of those meetings, out of those 4 items, and we're going to adjourn till Monday, April 27th at 1:30 at the property located at 1900 Lassoon Road, which is El Encanto.
Madam Mayor, I
Go ahead.
believe these the plan is to hold these closed sessions in your office.
Okay, yeah. It's pretty clean. We can do it.
Well, I think room 15 is being used.
Okay, I know.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.